Guys, we need to talk about the mark of the beast. And I mean, really talk about it. We need to get into Revelation 13 in detail. I think there's a lot of conspiracy theory stuff that just thrives on Revelation 13, but there's also a lot of dismissive stuff that just ignores Revelation 13. And I think we need to battle both of those extremes, and we need to actually just approach Revelation 13 with a proper hermeneutic, the normal way. That, by the way, hermeneutic just means the method of interpretation. There's a way to interpret the Bible. There's a way to interpret ancient texts and find out what they meant to convey. And that method of interpretation, hermeneutic, we need to apply to Revelation 13, to the mark of the beast, to the beast that comes up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 crowns, and the other beast that's like a lamb with 2 horns. And what is going on here? What this is a confusing passage, and it should be until you do the actual study. It's not that you get to make up whatever you want. Okay, it's not that you see. I don't know, Russia attacking Ukraine, and you say, aha, Revelation 13, let's make this fit. Or America attacking Iran, aha, Revelation 13. That's not how it works. There are rules, and we're going to get into that today. So that's the goal today. We're going to dive deep on Revelation 13. I hope you brought your dive deep swimming clothes or whatever. Let's just move on from that pun. Let's talk about some basics. This is first of all, this is part of the series that we're doing every month here on the Bible Explained. We're doing a live stream every month where we're going through the what I call the 4 prophets of the apocalypse, or Daniel, Jesus, and Paul and John. So those are your 4 prophets that talk about end times events and put them in orders. Like, this thing has to happen before that thing, type of statements, right? There's a lot of other things that are said about the end times by prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel and others. But when you get timing related events, it's really, especially the timing right before Jesus, the return of the Messiah. That's all Daniel, Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, Paul in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and John in the book of Revelation. So we're studying those out to do the hard work of looking at the controversial passages. That's what's debated. What order will this all happen? We all agree that it's going to happen, or at least Christians agree that prophecy is true prophecy, and it either is going to happen, or maybe some people like Preterists would say it has already been fulfilled. But none of us should be approaching the Bible and saying this isn't real prophecy. It's not really going to happen. The question is, what is the order? And that's really what we're trying to do with this series. So I think this is number 17 in our series. So you got a lot of catching up to do. This is your first video. But don't feel like you have to go watch all 17 videos, but those are there for you if you'd like to do that research. I've done a lot of work and a lot of research on your behalf, and I want to present this series as a way to dive into it and learn about it. If you're in that study, if you're trying to figure out Revelation, then I'm going to sometimes allude to things that I've already talked about, and you can go back and watch those, or you can just say, okay, he's done the research, I'm just going to listen to this video. That's fine. So we're going to talk a lot about Daniel today, and I did 5 videos that worked through Daniel, really 3, but the first 2 before those 3 were kind of an introduction to Daniel. They were talking about the different views on the millennium. So I did like 5 videos on Daniel, each of them about 2 hours long, so about 10 hours on Daniel. Then we did some time on several videos on at least 2, maybe 1.5 videos on the Olivet Discourse. Then we did 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now we're on Revelation. We've got to Revelation 13. We still got several chapters left to go, but we're on our way. So let me break this down for you, just to give you some of the basics so you understand where we're coming from here. There are 3 different views on the end times. If you want to like simplify everything, right? It's very complex. There's a lot of different views within the views, lots of different variations and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, there are 3 general views about the end times. Okay, let me pull them up on your screen just to give you this. I do this in every video just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, this is the view that I hold. It is the premillennial view. I don't hold that because I was told to hold it, or because my church says this is what you have to believe. I studied it out. I started as a premillennial. I studied it out expecting to change my mind. And when I finished, I was like, man, I think I have to be premillennial. I think that's really the only thing I can do. So this is my view by conviction after much study. But I want to present to you the study, not the conclusions necessarily. I don't want you to have to come to my conclusion. I just want to show you why I came to this conclusion in the study. So premillennial. This is what we believe as premillennials. Generally speaking, premillennials are dispensational. Not all of them. Like there is such a thing as they call themselves the historic premillennial. But generally speaking, premillennials believe there's this 7 years somewhere in the future right before Jesus comes back that sort of countdowns to the return of Christ. Okay, that's called dispensational premillennialism, or just general, most people believed it premillennialism. So there's 3 years that you can see that on the screen there, 3 years that lead up to the return of Christ. And then after Jesus returns, he rules on this earth for 1,000 years. That's what's described in Revelation 20. It's a very literal reading of Revelation 20. It says he comes and he reigns for 1,000 years. Then he destroys the whole world and creates a whole new creation and continues on reigning forever, for all of eternity. Okay, that's the premillennial timeline. The biggest question about the end times really revolves around that 1,000 years mentioned in Revelation 20. Okay, so here's another view. I'm going to give you the amillennial view. Nope, I'm not actually. Let me see if I can pull it up here. There we go. Amillennial timeline. I was trying to find the right picture. Okay, so the amillennial timeline is going to say, well, the 1,000 years is really just very figurative, and it talks about how Christ just kind of generally reigns. He's in heaven right now. He reigns in our hearts, and it's sort of a very spiritual, figurative thing. The amillennial view, again, I'm generalizing here, but it basically treats... this is very simplistic and very general, so I apologize to amillennials who are watching, but it basically treats, if I want to be very simplistic, it basically treats prophecy as if it were poetry and says these are just teaching us spiritual truths, reminding us of spiritual things that we can apply to our lives. It's not so much about some literal time in the future. Now, there is an amillennial view that does have a literal time in the future. There's a lot of variations on that. But generally speaking, amillennials are going to be idealist when they approach the end times. They're going to say, these are giving us ideas, spiritual concepts, not so much direct prophecies. Now, I think that's a bad way to interpret what is obviously prophecy. So, sure, in prophecy, you're going to find ideas, right? Like when an antichrist comes and persecutes believers. Sure, that's a kind of thing that happens a lot, and we can identify with that because believers are persecuted through all ages, but it doesn't mean that that's the interpretation of that prophecy. It does have an idea contained in it, but it has an interpretation as well, which is why we'll actually do a whole episode, I think, a whole live stream at the end of walking through the book of Revelation. So maybe the end of this year, maybe beginning of next year sometime, whenever we finish. And I will try to just do a whole one on amillennial arguments and why I think they are not the correct way to interpret. But they just generally think we are in that reign of Christ right now, and Jesus will return and then bring in the new creation. So there's no like future necessary things of prophecy that have to happen except Jesus returns. The only thing that has to happen in the future is Jesus will return. And everything else is just kind of, who knows? Well, it could be figurative, could be literal. And it's a very middle of the road, kind of like it'll all pan out in the end. I don't have to figure that out kind of a position. So it's a favorite among pastors who haven't necessarily studied the prophecies out in a lot of detail. Not that everyone who holds amillennialism hasn't studied it out. I'm just saying it is a growing in popularity among those who just don't want to have to bother studying it. I think that's wrong because I do think that the Bible, that we're given prophecies for a purpose. Like I think we're supposed to study them. So let me see if I can go to postmillennial, if I can get postmillennial to come up. There it is. Postmillennial timeline is this. And again, there's different variations of postmillennialism, but generally speaking, that 1,000 years when Jesus reigns, the amillennial says it's all figurative. It's just happening ever since Jesus came. He's been reigning sort of in our hearts. It's all spiritual. The postmillennial generally will say it's literal, but it's literal in the sense that he's reigning through his body, which is the church. So believers are reigning on Christ's behalf. And so they believe that we need to go out. It's a figurative time period. It's not really 1,000 years, but it's a literal reign. Postmillennials will say we as Christians need to go out into the world, conquer the world with the gospel of Jesus, and then Jesus will return after we conquer it. And Jesus is going to conquer the world through us as the church. And they would say that those 7 years that a premillennial says still needs to happen in the future, they're going to say that was the first 3.5 years was the ministry of Jesus, and halfway through Jesus was put to death, and then the last 3.5 years is the time from Jesus' death until the gospel went to the Gentiles in the book of Acts with Peter going to Cornelius. They don't really have any proof that that's how long that was. They just say that's what it was. So generally speaking, they're going to look at all the prophecies kind of fulfilled in the first century. They usually point to 70 AD. All these prophecies are about what's going to happen in 70 AD when Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans, instead of saying it's something in the future with a real Antichrist and all these real judgments and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there are your three different views. Two of them are not going to read Revelation 13 in a way that means something in the future about an Antichrist and a mark of the beast and all this stuff. They're going to say amillennial is just like, it's all figurative, it's all sort of messages to us to learn from. And the postmillennial is going to say this all happened in the first century. All right, we're going to look and see if those claims actually bear out when we look at the book of Revelation today. But I think, let me just give you my answer. I think that we are going to find that, yes, in fact, there will be a real Antichrist. There will be a real mark of the beast. There will be a real war against everyone who won't take the mark, and they won't be able to buy and sell. There's going to be a real miracles that are performed by a real false prophet that are going to try to convince people to worship the beast, the Antichrist. So I think that's going to be our conclusion. But before we get to the conclusions, let's look at the chapter. And what I want to do is I want to show you all the things that it's drawing on. This is why I started in this series in Daniel, showing you what Daniel says. Because now that we get to Revelation 13, you're going to see that Revelation 13 is relying heavily on Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8 even, chapter 9, chapter 11, and chapter 12. All the prophecies of Daniel are being referenced in Revelation 13. Every vision, every prophecy of Daniel finds itself somewhere in Revelation 13. Even the prophecy in in Daniel 8, which is just about the Greek Empire conquering the Medo-Persian Empire, which is all in the past, even before the time of John, even that is referenced in Revelation 13. It's very important that you understand that you can't understand Revelation 13 if you don't have a really good grasp and understand Daniel. If you don't understand Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel, don't even try. And if somebody tries to explain Revelation 13 to you and does not mention Daniel, they don't know what they're talking about. Stop listening to them. Okay, even Jesus, when he was explaining the end times, said, if you haven't read Daniel, go back and read it. Him that readeth, let him understand. Now, maybe that was Matthew commenting on Jesus, but both Matthew and Mark say it, so I think it very well probably was Jesus. Either way, the apostles and Jesus knew that you needed to understand Daniel to understand the end times. So I think that's very important. Let's pull up the chapter now, and we'll get right to it. This is the Revelation 13, the big one, guys. This is the big one. Let me go up to the top, and we'll start right at the beginning. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horn 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping I'm thinking as I'm reading. Most people who aren't super familiar with Revelation 13 are going to think, Mark of the Beast, 666. Yeah, that's the very last few verses of the chapter. Okay, we got to get there slowly if we're going to understand it when we get there. Okay, verse 16, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the name of his number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 603 score. That's 66. So 666. So that's there. But you don't even try. Like, don't even try. Let's start at the top and work our way down, because there's a lot here, and nothing at the end is going to make sense if you skip the beginning. All right. So hang in there. Also, don't forget to put in your questions in the box below. Let me know thoughts, comments, even challenges to things that I say. If you think, hey, that doesn't sound right, go ahead and put it in there, but put a big Q in front of it, even if it's not a question, even if it's just a challenge. But that way the moderator can spot it and send it to me so that I can address it. If I don't, but at the end of our stream, I'll address those things. I don't know if we'll have an intermission today. We'll find out, I guess. We'll see if I need that by the end. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Okay. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Okay, this is ringing bells if you remember Daniel. Let's just read verse 2 as well. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him power and his seat and great authority. Again, if you remember Daniel, if you guys were studying Daniel with me, okay, this is ringing lots of bells. You're saying, well, I think I've heard that before. And the answer, of course, is yes, you have heard this before if you studied Daniel. Let me give you a couple things. We're going to go to Daniel 7, because Daniel 7 is the main one. But let's just look at the very first phrase. I stood upon the sand of the sea. Now, there is a very interesting, I'm not going to really get into it or try to weigh in on it, but there's an interesting textual debate here about whether it should say, and I stood, or whether it should say, he stood. From what I can tell, there's good reason that this probably is referring to the dragon here, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandment of God and have the testimonies of Christ. And it's saying that John saw the dragon stand upon the sand of the sea. And maybe you could even say, and I saw him stand upon the sand of the sea, kind of a thing. But either way, it doesn't really affect our interpretation here massively, except that you have a dragon in chapter 12, and these chapters were added by, John didn't write chapters. The chapters were added in the, 1200s? Can't remember the guy who added the chapters. Anyway, the chapter divisions here might distract us from what's going on. You have a dragon, and now you have a beast. Those are not the same words, drakon in Greek, and I can't remember the word for beast in Greek. But beast is not going to be a drakon like in chapter 12. So you have two different things going on here, and the dragon is watching the beast come up out of the sea. That's pretty interesting, and it's going to play into it because we're going to see a second beast. And so between the three of them, you're going to have a dragon, a beast, and another beast. You're going to have this, what many have termed an unholy trinity, and it's clear that you do have this evil kind of three-person thing going on. There's an evil trinity thing going on here. And it does seem to be mocking or falsely representing God, the Godhead. So at any rate, I stood upon the sand of the sea. So he's on the sand of the sea, either him or the dragon, probably both of them. John is watching the dragon. And saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Okay, so the beast is rising up out of the sea. This should automatically remind us of Daniel 7. Remember what happened in Daniel 7? Go back and watch my video on Daniel 7 if you don't remember it. But we went in lots of detail on Daniel 2 and 7, showed the comparisons. But look at verse 3. And 4 great beasts, Daniel is here. It says, Daniel spake, and I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And 4 beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. Okay, so Daniel saw 4 beasts come up out of the sea. And here in Revelation chapter 13, here comes one beast out of the sea. Okay, there's an obvious reference there. John is writing in the 90s AD. He's writing in the 1st century. Daniel was writing all the way back in the 6th century BC. Did I say John was writing BC? He was writing AD. In the 1st century AD. And all the way back in the 6th century BC, in the 500s, that was when Daniel was writing. So these are separated by in the neighborhood of 600 years. But it's clear that John is writing and referencing purposefully, or the vision that God is giving him is a purposeful callback to Daniel chapter 7. That's really indisputable, okay? So out of the sea. Now, what does this mean that they came up out of the sea? First, there are two different theories about this beast coming out of the sea. Does it mean it comes up out of many nations? Of all the nations of the earth, here is produced a beast. It's a beast who is it's an empire over the nations of the earth. This seems like a very plausible, and it's definitely, I would say this is the most likely interpretation. Most people will go with this interpretation. Let me give you why. A couple places here where we can see that. Trying to jump back and forth to all my windows open here. Revelation 17 and verse 15 refers to the beast. It says, in fact, this is actually the great whore, but she's sitting on the same beast. At the beginning, it says, blah, 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 blah. Here it is. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold, precious stones. And she is riding on a beast. Where is the beast? Yeah, here it is. Verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman upon a scarlet-covered beast, full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's exactly what we saw. 7 heads, 10 horns in Revelation 13. Okay? But here in verse 15, he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So she's sitting on a beast that's on top of waters, and the waters represent people, multitude, nation, and tongues. Okay, that gives us a really good idea that this is probably what is being referred to by the waters in Revelation 13. Many nations, many peoples. That's why we thought in Revelation 12, when a flood came out of the dragon's mouth to chase down Israel, I believe that's Israel, that's probably a whole bunch of armies. Armies from all kinds of nations are being sent out there because waters, seas, these seem to be consistent throughout the Bible. Let me give you a couple other references. We won't go there, but I'll just give them to you rapid fire here. Isaiah 17:12 through 13 talks about many peoples are thundering like the sea, and they're roaring like many waters. Isaiah 57:20, the wicked are like the tossing sea. Psalm 65:7, God stills the roaring of the seas like the tumult of the peoples. Jeremiah 6:23 and Ezekiel 26:3. All of these have imagery of many peoples like a sea. So like waves of the sea or something like that. So that's pretty consistent throughout the Bible. There is another thought here, though, that I thought I might throw out at you just for your own studies, that this sea here that the beast comes out of might represent more than just nations. It probably does represent nations, but it might represent more than that, because when he comes up out of the sea, it's interesting that in other places in Revelation, it's not just that he comes up out of the sea. Let me give you an example. In Revelation 11, verse 7, there's talking about the 2 witnesses. And when they have finished their testimony, those 2 witnesses, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war with them, or the abyss. The bottomless pit makes war with them and kills them. Now, is that the same beast? Is it a different beast? Probably the same beast, and yet here he's coming up out of the bottomless pit instead of out of the sea. And so you say, well, yeah, well, maybe, why does that mean that sea means bottomless pit? Well, there's some who would say that sea might actually mean bottomless pit. Let me go to Revelation 17, because it shows that these are the same beasts. In Revelation 17, verse 8, you have this statement: the beast that thou sawest, that's the one that the great whore, the great harlot is on. She's riding on a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. It will ascend out of the bottomless pit. Okay, it'll ascend out of the sea, it'll ascend out of the bottomless pit. So sea might be representative of just the bottomless pit, the abyss. And here's one good argument for that. That's in Romans chapter 10. There's a quotation. In Romans 10, it quotes Deuteronomy 30. So verse 7? He quotes Deuteronomy and he says, "Or who shall ascend into the deep?" Or that is, he uses the word abyss, the bottomless pit. That is to bring up Christ again from the dead. Here he says, "Who shall ascend into heaven?" And he's quoting, "But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh on this wise, say not in thine heart, who shall ascend into heaven?" He's quoting, and what he's quoting is Deuteronomy 30. Let me see if I can go there for you. Deuteronomy 30, verse 12. "Is it not in heaven that thou shouldest say, Who shall go up for us to heaven, and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldest say, Who shall go over the sea for us, and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very nigh thee, in thy mouth and in thine heart, that thou mayest do it." This is what Paul's quoting, and yet Paul switches out sea in Deuteronomy for abyss, the deep, the bottomless pit, in Romans 10. So then we have a couple possibilities then with Revelation 13 and the sea. Either this sea that he's coming out of represents how the beast comes out of many nations and rules over many nations, which I think is true whether it's represented by sea or not. It's obviously true that this is talking about a world empire that rules over other nations. But it might also be talking about how he comes out of the bottomless pit. His source is demonic influence from the bottomless pit, which is clear throughout the book of Revelation that he ascends out of the pit. So I think you have either way. What sea means there could go either way. I'm going to say it probably does mean both. I'm going to take the middle ground. I'm not going to take a view on it. I think both works very well with the context and with the consistent words throughout the Bible. It being nations is a little bit more common for the word sea, but it's still true that both of those things are happening. This beast does descend out of the bottomless pit, and he does rule over and come from the multitude of nations of the earth. So which one is being said in verse 1? I don't know. But if I had to pick one, I'd say that sea here probably still does refer to nations, even though it certainly is also true that he comes from the bottomless pit. So what does it mean he comes from the bottomless pit? We'll talk more about that in Revelation 17, when it actually says he comes from the abyss. But I think it just, if I were to simplify it, I'd say this beast is sourced from hell. He is sourced from demonic power. And that is a little bit different than other nations, where men build nations and then demons try to come and take them over, right? They try to run them. This one is actually built and sourced from demonic influence. I think that's probably what's being said there. Okay, what else is in the first couple verses that we could talk about? Well, let's talk about the horns on his head. Okay, so it says that he has, verse 1 still, he had 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, this is reminiscent of Daniel, for sure, but it's not exactly what we see in Daniel. So in Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 7, there's a dreadful beast. "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So there's no mention about the number of heads. You would think that if it had 7 heads, Daniel would probably mention that. That's a little odd. So we would just assume that it has 1 head, and yet it has 10 horns. But here in Revelation 13, notice it has 7 heads but still has 10 horns. Now we're going to talk more about this in Revelation 17, because Revelation 17 actually interprets this beast and tells you what it means. So let me just give you the short version. Revelation 17 gives you two interpretations for the 7 heads and one interpretation for the 10 horns. The 7 heads, the number 7 is doing double work here in this beast. So I'll just give it to you very briefly. Revelation 17. And I think we're going to be looking at verse 9 through 13. Yeah. Here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth is going to refer to the woman, the great whore, the harlot, in Revelation 17, is sitting on a beast. The beast has 7 heads, and so she's sitting on 7 mountains. Now, the city of 7 mountains is well known in the first century. It'd be well known to be Rome. Rome was the city of 7 hills. So this seems to be an obvious reference to Rome. We'll talk more about that when we get to Revelation 17. But it's doing double work. The number 7 doesn't just mean the mountains or the location, the city of Rome. It says, and there are 7 kings. So not only is the number 7 a reference to Rome, the city, because of the 7 hills, but it also has a reference to 7 kings or kingdoms. Now remember in Daniel, we talked about how kings and kingdoms, their kingdom and their king, can be interchangeable in prophecy. Babylon was represented by Nebuchadnezzar, and when Nebuchadnezzar was represented, Babylon was represented. So it was like Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon are both represented the same way in prophetic literature. So 7 kings also could mean 7 kingdoms. Those are back and forth. 7 kings, the king who starts the kingdom and the kingdom itself, interchangeable. And he says that 5 are fallen and 1 is. This seems to me, we'll talk more about this, but let me just present you a theory about what this probably is. And then we'll go back to Revelation 13 to see if it fits. Okay, 5 are fallen and 1 is. These are probably world empires. 5 are fallen and 1 is. In the time of John, he was in the 6th world empire that went unchecked throughout the world. There were 6 of them up until the time of John. It was first the Tower of Babel, right? Then you have Egypt. These are world empires that were unchecked. That doesn't mean that they controlled everything in the world, but if they wanted to, they could, essentially, because they were unchecked. There was no other world power to check their power. Okay, so we have the Tower of Babel, Egypt, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. And John was living in the 6th one, which would have been in Rome. So 5 are fallen, 1 is. And the other is not yet come. So there was a 7th one. And this seems to be, remember what we studied in Daniel, that final empire that is made up of 10 kings that sort of reforms the Roman Empire. But they are quickly conquered. 3 of those kings are taken down. Remember Daniel 7? We'll read it in just a moment. 3 kings are taken down out of that revived Roman Empire. And a new king is set up in their place, and he controls the whole thing. So you actually have another empire. So you have John's living in the 7th world empire, but rather the 6th world empire. That's Rome. But there's a new Roman Empire that's coming. The other is not yet come. I think that's still not yet come, even to us today. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. It's only a short period of time before the Antichrist conquers that and is sort of reformed into the Antichrist kingdom. So the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. So there's your Antichrist kingdom, who assumes control of the kingdom of the 10 kings, and is of the 7 and goeth into perdition. He's of the 7, meaning he's just assuming the power that the previous empires of the world used to have. And he's going to go into perdition. And the 10 horns, which thou sawest, are 10 kings, which received no kingdom as yet, meaning at the time of John, those 10 kings did not have a kingdom. That's very important. Because remember what a postmillennial says. A postmillennial says, all of this was fulfilled in the 1st century. A postmillennial is going to say that John was writing in the 60s AD instead of the 90s. All of our evidence really points to the 90s AD. We've talked about that in other videos. But let's say that he's writing in the 60s AD. These 10 kings had no power yet in the time of John, when John was writing. So a postmillennial says the 10 kings are the first 10 Caesars and emperors of Rome. They can't be that, because John is being told those 10 kings didn't have any power yet. So they have to be a future empire, and they aren't successive. They're all together, because look what it says. But they receive power as kings 1 hour. All of them together at one time receive power as kings in one set period of time with the beast, at the same time that the beast is there. But these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Okay, so this fits very well with what we already saw in Daniel chapter 7 and what we're seeing in Revelation 13, that there is this future revived Roman Empire that's a conglomerate of 10 kingdoms that come together, and they give their power over to the Antichrist. So you have then those 6 world empires that existed up till the time of John, and another world empire that's coming in the future. Now you might say, well, couldn't that be the Ottoman Empire or the French Empire or the American Empire or the British Empire? No, none of those things could fit these descriptions, because they have to be world empires that are unchecked, that have all the power of the world without any other world powers to check them. There have always been other world powers that checked these other empires. Like even the American Empire, we're not the only world power. We might be the strongest, we aren't the only one. The French Empire was never the only world power. They were very powerful, but they weren't the only world power. British, the same thing. So you'd never have had one empire that controlled the world, as much of it as it wanted to control, that was unchecked since the time of Rome. And so, at any rate, this seems very consistent. We'll talk more about Revelation 17 at a later date. But if we go back to Revelation 13, now knowing what we saw in Revelation 17, I think this makes a lot of sense. Because he has 7 heads. If the 7 heads don't just refer to the mountains which is his base, like the city of Rome, they also refer to the 7 kingdoms. It's the 7th kingdom, world empire. It's after Rome, the new Rome is the 7th one of the world. And 10 horns referring to those 10 kings that are mentioned in Daniel, then this would explain why it says that he's going to have blasphemy. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard and like a bear and like a lion, right? A leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion. Okay? Let's go back to Daniel, and you'll see all of this put together. So Daniel he was looking at the kingdoms in the reverse order. He was living in the Babylonian Empire, and he saw the first beast represented Babylon. Verse 4, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth. I made a whole argument about why this is obviously the Babylonian Empire. You'll have to go back and watch that video. I just can't redo every video in every new video. Okay. But there's Babylon coming up out of the sea as a lion. Then you have Medo-Persia coming up out of the sea as a bear. And you guessed it, the next one in verse 6 is Greece coming up out of the sea as a leopard, right? So John is looking backwards and he sees the leopard, the bear, the lion. And Daniel is looking forward and he's seeing the lion, the bear, the leopard. Either way, these are the other kingdoms that their power was conquered and assumed by the next conquering empire, right? So when Babylon was conquered by Persia, Persia assumed all the power of Babylon. When Greece conquered Persia, then Greece assumed all the power of Persia, which was also all the power of Babylon. And when Rome conquered Greece, it assumed all the power of Greece, which was all the power of Persia, which was all the power of Babylon. You see how then when you have a new empire, it is like all the other empires put together. It's assuming all of that power. That, I think, is the obvious reason why you have in Revelation 13 this beast at the end, the final conglomerate, the final unified world power, is going to look like all of them. It's the conclusion of the whole series of world empires, of Gentile world empires over the planet. Okay, but don't forget what it says in Daniel 7 about the 10 horns. Remember that that the 10 horns represented 10 kings in Daniel 7, as well as what we saw in Revelation 17. It says here, he had 10 horns in verse 7, and then when these are interpreted, it says, verse 20, and he wanted to know, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, you had 3 of them falling and being conquered by the new one that came in. That's the Antichrist. We talked about this before. I know it needs justification, the claims I'm making. I'm just saying I have made those justifications in previous videos. And when the interpretation is given, verse 24, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Okay, so obviously they're all existing together, again, because 3 of them have to be conquered by one guy, so it means they're all together. He subdues 3 to take over the empire. All right, back to Revelation chapter 13. So we're still on verse 1. But we're getting there, guys. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. That just tells you what the horns are. They are kings. They are kingdoms and kings that come together to form a revived Roman Empire, as we've seen consistently all throughout the book of Daniel. This is very clearly stated. And upon his head the name of blasphemy. It's not really even unclear, because in Daniel 9, it says, the people of the prince that shall come are going to destroy the sanctuary. The people of the prince, that's the people of the Antichrist. And the ones who actually fulfilled that prophecy were Romans. So we know the Antichrist leads a Roman Empire. These are all things that just follow. They fit. We've talked about it many times. So go back and look at some of the study. But this is why I think studying the book of Daniel and then studying the book of Revelation is super helpful. Because these things are reoccurring themes that rhyme so that you learn them and so that you understand them. And so it's actually trying to explain itself to us. I don't think we should take scripture that's been written down for us and references itself so that we can help us understand what it means, and even gives us interpretation in many places throughout the prophecies, and then say, it's impossible to know. It's impossible to know. I don't think so. I think if it were impossible to know, it wouldn't be written down, or at least, I don't think it'd be written down. And if it were written down, I don't think that it would be say, here's the interpretation of this prophecy. So I think we're in good hands. We're in a good place if we're trying to understand what God seems to be wanting us to understand. Okay, verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power. Okay, so here's the dragon and the beast. The dragon is giving him power, and the dragon is giving him his seat and great authority. That's probably why it's said that he comes up out of the bottomless pit, because he gets his power from the dragon, from Satan. Now, you say, well, how do you know the dragon is Satan? Well, that was mentioned in chapter 12, verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. Okay, the dragon is interpreted in chapter 12 as Satan. Now we're in chapter 13, but the dragon's still there, and he's bringing up. Remember, he's trying to destroy those who are on the earth. He's trying to destroy the woman, which is Israel, who has run out of the city of Jerusalem and is hiding out in the wilderness. And to do that, he's turning to give power to this beast. So this is all part of that, okay? All right, so verse 3. Oh, you know what? There's one phrase we didn't cover. We're going to cover it in a minute, so I'll let it slide for now. Upon his head, the name of blasphemy. That also is a reference to Daniel. But we'll come back to that because the word blasphemy is going to be used again in verse 5, so we might as well just hit it then. Okay, so verse 3. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Now, some people have guessed that this means that the Antichrist will be killed and will rise from the dead, or he will look like he died. He'll like manufacture a scenario where it looks like he was assassinated or something like that, and then he'll rise from the dead. Some people have even said this is Donald Trump because he had a wound in his head. No, that doesn't work. Sorry. Let me just kill that one right here. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. Okay, you don't get a nick in the ear, and people are like, "Oh, I think he's dead. I think he's dead." Wounded to death, and his deadly wound. It was a deadly wound, not a wound with a deadly weapon that could have killed him. No, a wound that actually was a deadly wound. It killed him or should have killed him. The wound itself did. And all the world wondered after the beast because he was healed from a deadly wound. Now, because beast here is referring to a king or a kingdom, both of those things could be in view, either one, because that's how prophecy works with these beasts. It could be referring to Nebuchadnezzar or to Babylon in Daniel 7. So this could be referring to the Antichrist, or it could be referring to his kingdom. I think the safe way to go here is to just say it's talking about his kingdom, because that seems consistent, right? The Roman Empire is basically dead. It doesn't exist as an empire. It certainly doesn't exist. It was never conquered. Italy still exists. It's an incredibly weak nation as far as nations go. It's not like a very strong, powerful nation, but I mean, it still exists. So if it were to become an empire again, oh yeah, that would be like a deadly wound healing. It'd be very similar to that. It would fit pretty well with that prophecy. And that, I think that works very well without the Antichrist needing some kind of appearance of rising from the dead kind of a thing. But that being said, the Antichrist is Antichrist, and if he wants to, get extra popularity by looking like he rose from the dead like Jesus, that could work too. And it works kind of well with Revelation 17. Because here, when it's talking about the Antichrist, it calls him the beast who had the deadly wound and was healed. Remember what it says here. The beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth. That eighth, remember that was the Antichrist kingdom, and is of the seven and goeth to perdition. So that was and is not, is that talking about his kingdom? It was as an empire, the Rome, and then it stopped being an empire, and then it came back? Or is that again saying maybe the Antichrist himself is the one who, like, he's the beast there is talking about the Antichrist himself? It's difficult to tell. Okay, this is not something that I think is clear. I think what is there are things that are clear and there are things that are not clear. This is a new piece of information. This it's not, and then it comes back kind of a thing, whether it's the Antichrist or his kingdom. So whether or not this has to do with exactly how this is interpreted, I don't think we have a good place in Daniel to show us what this means. But I would say that probably the easiest way to do this is to say, okay, well, it fits very well since Daniel does give us a kingdom, Rome, in Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7, that then has this new version of it later on. It fits very well with it being there, then not there, then there again, right? It's a deadly wound, and then it comes back. That fits. I don't know that that's the only way to do it, but I would default to that, right? Instead of going on with, this Left Behind idea of somebody tries to assassinate the Antichrist and then he gets more popularity. I mean, look, I love the Left Behind series. I had a fun time reading it, but it's fiction, okay? And I think it's very dangerous to kind of make fiction into as if it were scripture. Let me give you, just so you can understand what I'm saying here. This is the vision of Daniel 2, and then we'll do Daniel 7. But it had a head of gold. The head of gold of the image was Babylon. We talked about this. The Persian Empire was the chest and arms of silver. I think the arms is very interesting that the arms are of silver because the Persian Empire was Medo-Persia. You had two sort of parts of it. Greece would be the central part of the image, made out of bronze or brass, and then Rome was the legs. It was iron. And it's interesting, Rome is the legs because Rome did split into two parts, right? And then you had New Rome, this conglomerate, this weak conglomerate of a reformed Roman Empire as the feet, and it mentions the toes twice. Now, I think before when we were going through this, I said something to the effect that the Bible says that it has 10 toes. And that was me like studying something, writing something down, studying something, and then looking at my notes and thinking that misreading my notes and thinking that that's what it said in the text. So the text mentions the toes twice. It doesn't mention how many toes there are, but I think it's not a stretch to assume that there are 10 of them, right? Okay, I think it would tell us if there wasn't 10. So since it mentions the toes twice, I think we can assume that there are 10 of them. And that is important because then we get to Daniel chapter 7, and we have a similar vision, or at least a similar interpretation of the vision, because the Bible tells us what the interpretation is. And it is what we've just been saying, it is a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a dragon. But the lion clearly represents Babylon, the bear represents Persia, the leopard represents Greece, and the dragon has two parts. First, it has its iron teeth, and then it has the 10 horns. The iron seems to be the same as the iron legs in the first vision with the image. And then the 10 horns seem to represent the same thing as those 10 kings, or the 10 toes, the conglomerate of nations. And that seems to be what happens in Daniel chapter 7. You have 10 kings that give their power to the Antichrist. It all is very consistent. The premillennial view is a very consistent handling of the text. You don't have to go to one text and wiggle and squirm around to try to make it work. You can go to each text with a premillennial position and say, I'm just going to use the same hermeneutic I use on any other prophetic text of Scripture, and guess what? You end up at the same place. You end up at premillennialism. So premillennialism is essentially consistent hermeneutic, not deciding this can't be that because I want it to be something else, or because I've been told it's something else. At any rate, so there's your images, and you can see that the last one, that image, that dragon or that beast, that last one has 10 horns, but as far as we can tell, one head. Now this one that we're looking at here in Revelation 13 has 7 heads, 10 horns, but the 10 horns, I think, obviously represent 10 kings because they each have a crown. They have 10 crowns. All right. Now, verse 3 says, one of the heads were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. I think that's going to be head number 6, because that was Rome, according to chapter 17. John was living in the 6th of these empires, of these kingdoms. And the Roman Empire did go out of existence, and then it comes back, and that would be head number 7. Or you could call it coming back to be, head number 6 coming back could be counted as head number 7, or then the next one's head number 8, or you can count them differently, is what I'm saying. I think Revelation 17 is showing you the 7 refers to all the kingdoms up before the Antichrist, and it counts them as 7 because New Rome is the 7th. Antichrist would be the 8th then. In this case, the Antichrist is the whole beast, and all the other kingdoms leading up to it are the other 7. So, at any rate, that seems to be what's happening here, and because of that, I think your head here is going to be a kingdom, not a person, But here's what happens: all the world wonders after the beast, meaning they just think, this is wow, look at this, wow. They're wondering about it. I think this is what we read about in Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24, verse 36. Jesus says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be." I think during this time, people are going to be seeing this new revived Roman Empire, and they're going to be, wow, look at this. World peace, guys. Look at what this is awesome. People aren't going to be, I think we think of the end times as this super dark time. It will be. But right before it, like when all the things that are really dark, like the Antichrist and the one world government and all that stuff, people are going to think, this is really cool. This is really good. This is awesome. Paul mentioned this. We saw this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. "But of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child." And so when everyone else is saying peace and safety, all of a sudden destruction comes. As travail upon a woman with child. Okay, so then we're having this kind of thing playing out in Revelation 13, right? They're wondering, wow, look at this. They're probably thinking, peace, safety, this is great. This is wonderful. Okay. Verse 4, "And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power to the beast." So who do they worship? The dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. All right, this is what Satan wants. This is what he's been wanting. This is what he's always wanted. He has wanted the worship that is due to God. Now let's back up for a minute. The dragon gives power to the beast. There's a dragon and there's a beast. We saw how the dragon is mentioned in Revelation 11 and how the dragon is mentioned in Revelation 12 and the beast is mentioned in Revelation 11. But 2 Thessalonians is going to talk a lot about this. So let's go there for a minute. Yeah, so they worship the dragon. This, I think, is exactly what is talked about. We're going to be in Revelation, 2 Thessalonians 2 a lot. But look what it says. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things, and now ye know what withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way," or restraineth. That's what let means. "And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders." So what is he going to do? He's going to demand to be worshipped as God. Where is he going to get the power from? Satan. So people are going to be worshiping Satan, but not knowing it. That's exactly what we just read in Revelation 13. That they end up worshiping the dragon because they're so enamored by the beast. They're so enamored by the Antichrist kingdom that is going to lead them to worship Satan himself and probably not even know it. They probably will not be aware that they're worshiping Satan. Maybe they will. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even know it. Okay, they worship the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" One of the things they're marveling about is there's not going to be any more war because nobody can beat this kingdom. This is the ultimate power in the universe. This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. That's my Star Wars reference for the day. This is such a powerful empire. We have world peace, is what they're saying. And that's what we read in Daniel chapter 11. Remember, guys, this is all from Daniel. It's crazy. Look what it says in Daniel 11 when it talks about the Antichrist kingdom. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god. Some people think that means he's going to be homosexual. I don't think that's what it's saying. Nor regard any god. For he shall magnify himself above all, but in his state shall he honor the God of forces, and a God of whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. Essentially, what it's saying is he's just going to amass massive amounts of power and military force, and then anyone who stands against him, he's just going to wipe them out. And the people of the earth are going to say, wow, who can make war with him? Nobody can beat him. It's impossible. And they're going to worship him and his power because of that. That's part of the reason why they worship him. And it's probably the reason why they think that this is great. We're going to finally have peace and safety. Right? Okay, so there we go. They worship the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worship the beast, who is saying, who is able to make war with him? Who's like unto him? I know who can make war with him. Jesus. But anyway, that's what John is getting you to, right? Who is able to make war with him? Well, no one on the earth, but there is one. Okay, now let's do verse 5. 5 and 6 really kind of go together. So we'll just kind of put them together here. And we're going to talk about the blasphemy in the 42 months. So let's do that. Just quick check the stream, make sure we're all set. Yeah, good. Keep on popping in those questions and comments there in the live stream. All right, so here we go. Revelation 13, verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemy. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So he was given this task, this job, to go out and blaspheme for 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Okay, I mentioned that we're going to be talking about the blasphemy, so let's talk about it. Blasphemy is speaking directly against God, of course, and this is all throughout Daniel. This is a clear reference to Daniel 7, as is every verse of Revelation 13, essentially. Here we go. Let's do Revelation 7, verse 25. Very important, crucial verse of Daniel 7 is verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and the dividing of a time. Okay, notice what's in this verse. 1, there is a blasphemy. He speaks against the Most High. 2, there's a period of time that he's allowed to do it. It is a time. There's 1. There's singular, right? Times. There's 2, at least 2, plural. And dividing of a time, 3.5. All right, let's go back to Revelation 13, which has the exact same structure. There was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years, exactly. All right, do you see what's happening here? This is a reference to Daniel. It's talking about the same thing Daniel's talking about. If your interpretation of Daniel 7 is different than your interpretation of Revelation 13, you missed what John's trying to tell you. John is not trying to give you a different interpretation on Revelation 13 than Daniel 7. He's trying to show you that they are the same. He's giving you further information on the same stuff that Daniel 7 was talking about. It's very clear. He's constantly quoting and referencing it. Okay, in the book of Revelation. Okay, so, and he opened his mouth to speak blasphemy. There it is, blasphemy again. And this is all throughout Daniel chapter 7, this little horn speaks great words. It's also mentioned in Daniel 9. Obviously, in Daniel 9, verse 27, it's not really so much what he's speaking, but he confirms a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week, he causes sacrifice and oblation or grain offerings to cease, and for overspreading of abominations. He makes it desolate. He does something abominable in the temple so that it's unusable. It's desolate. It can't be used. So that would fit very well with blasphemy. Let's look at Daniel 11. We just read it, but we'll read it again very quickly. The king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. There we go. That is blasphemy, right? And then in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, and I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, which when he held up his hand, his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. Okay, again, times, and a half. 1 time plus 2 times, that's 3, plus a half, there's 3.5, 42 months. That's exactly what it says in Revelation 13. You see how this all goes together? So the 42 months is there. And by the way, the 3.5 years is mentioned all the way through Revelation 11, 12, and 13. This is why I think Revelation 11, 12, and 13 are talking about middle point stuff in the middle of the tribulation. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute, about the timing there. But twice in chapter 11, this time period is used. In verse 2, the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles in the holy city. They shall tread it underfoot 42 months. 42 months. Verse 3, I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. 1,260 days, same as 42 months, same as 3.5 years. It's all the same time period. In chapter 12, verse 6, and then again in verse 14, the woman runs into the wilderness for 1,260 days, 1,260 days. And then, what is it, verse 14, I said? And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and a half a time. So you got 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years, repeated over and over and over again. This is the 5th of those references in the book of Revelation, in the last, just in 3 chapters. It's mentioned 5 times, and it's mentioned several times, at least twice, in the book of Daniel. But really, Daniel chapter 9 would be a 3rd time. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, you have in the middle of a week, in the middle of a 7-year period, there is an abomination of desolation. Something happening in the middle of 7 years is a 3.5 years on one side and 3.5 years on the other side. So again, you have the same period. You have these things repeated over and over and over again, which gives us further conclusion that these are talking about the same things. Okay? All right, so this is just helping us build from Daniel to interpret Revelation 13. We don't say that we're going to start with our interpretation and try to get Daniel and Revelation to fit it. We say, okay, well, what was Daniel talking about? And Revelation is giving us further information on the same thing, so let's just follow this out, right? Okay, so we've gotten through 6 verses. We are almost halfway through this chapter, and we're going to get to the mark of the beast. Just trust me. We're actually going to move pretty quickly through the next several verses, but we'll pause on the false prophet part. Let's look at verse 7, which says, it was given unto him to make war. Let's find that. Okay, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. He makes war with the saints. Again, guys, I know I'm beating this like maybe a little bit too much. But let me just go to Daniel chapter 7 and look what it says over and over and over again. Daniel chapter 7, verse 21, this guy in this Roman Empire with 10 horns, who takes over a kingdom of 10 horns, and out of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things. There's the blasphemy, whose look was more stout than his fellows. What does he do? I beheld, and the same horde made war with the saints, and prevailed against them. He makes war, and he's actually successful. He kills many, many, many of them. He's prevailing. They're running in and hiding. Again in verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. In chapter 12 of Daniel, same thing. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. Over and over and over again is verse 6. And one of them said unto the man which was on the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? So they're trying to get to the end of all of this. And then verse, that's actually talking about the times and a half. I'm skipping in my notes back to a previous point. But this is consistent all the way through. Matthew 24 says this, verse 15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. That's Daniel 9, verse 27, and mentioned again in chapter 12. And it's going to be in the middle of a 7-year period, so there's 3.5 years after it, right? Stand in the holy place. We'll talk about that stand in the holy place line in a minute. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So they're going to flee into the mountains for how long? 3.5 years, because it's in the middle of a 7-year period when this thing happens. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes, and woe to them that are with child and that give suck in those days. Why? Verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. Don't get confused by the word tribulation, because the word tribulation is thrown around in eschatology way too much. What Jesus is saying here when he says, then shall be great tribulation, he's talking about the war against the saints, the attempt to kill every Christian that in the world by the world empire. And he's going to be very successful in doing this. God is going to protect a few of them. We saw that in chapter 12. There are those who run out into the wilderness and are protected, but there are many who are going to die. He's going to be successful in persecuting the saints in such a way that it has no equal anywhere ever since the beginning of time has anyone been so successful in killing God's people. Which is saying something, because people have been very successful in killing God's people in the past, but no one has ever been as successful as this kingdom will be at this time. So, and that's what the prophecy says. So we just kind of take what it says. Okay, let's add to this 2 Thessalonians, because I think this is what the 2 Thessalonians is talking about here, guys. Because in chapter 1, verse 4 of 2 Thessalonians, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure. So they're going through all these persecutions and tribulations. And what are they saying to themselves? We are in the tribulation. We are in that time when Jesus said is going to be worse than ever anywhere before. And Paul's saying, no, you're not. Verse 2. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us that the day of Christ is at hand. Okay, day of Christ here cannot be the coming of Christ or our gathering together unto him, right? Because he's beseeching them by that. Like, this thing comforts you, this other thing terrifies you, the day of Christ. What is he talking about? The day that Christ said is going to be the great tribulation that'll come on the whole world. I think that's pretty obvious, because he says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, or an apostasy, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. That would be the abomination of desolation, him claiming to be God and killing everybody who won't worship him, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing that he is God. There's the abomination of desolation. Okay, so again, all of this stuff is very consistent. It's like it lines up perfectly. It all agrees with each other. It's not like I'm just taking one random verse and saying, let me run with an interpretation here. I'm saying Daniel seems to say this, Matthew confirms it, 2 Thessalonians confirms it, Revelation confirms it times 1,000. Why wouldn't we take this as the interpretation? Okay, so let's go back to Revelation 3. I keep saying that. I feel like I've said that a lot. But we're just going to keep going back and forth and seeing all the conclude, and then we're going to tie it all up in a nice little bow when we get to the mark of the beast at the end, okay? So what we have so far, up to verse 7, is that there is a kingdom that arises. It's this is consistent all the way through all these prophecies we've seen so far. A kingdom arises in the end times that is a 10-nation kingdom that is based in Rome. It's a revived Roman Empire. That kingdom is given over to the Antichrist when he arises, shortly after the kingdom is formed, after the 10 kings come together. And it has something to do with 3 of those kings being subdued and the Antichrist taking over over the other 7. And he builds his forces, he builds his power. The people of the world wonder at it. They think nobody can ever fight this guy and this power, and we have peace and all this stuff. And we know that they don't really have peace. There is world war as a result of this. But maybe at the end of the world war, coming close to the middle of the tribulation, they're saying peace and safety again. Maybe they're saying that this is finally it. We finally got it. And then he enters into the temple of God, and he's going to claim to be God and kill anyone who doesn't worship him. This is what we're leading up to. And this seems very consistent, and that's going to be 3.5 years before Jesus returns. It's going to be a 3.5 year period before he returns. So this is all very consistent. It all fits very well with the premillennial view. It doesn't fit really very well with anything else. We're going to talk about the other views before we're done today, so just hang in there. I really thought this was going to be a shorter stream, but I'm not so sure anymore. Now I'm not very optimistic about that. But here we go. Let's look at verse 8. And all that dwell on the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Okay, so everyone, this is important. So at this time, when he claims to be God, everyone is going to worship him, except those whose names are in the Lamb's book of life. Now, according to Revelation chapter 20, that's the saved. Those are the ones going into the eternal kingdom of God. Revelation chapter 20 says, everyone is judged on their works and cast into hell, except those who are written in the book of life. So that's the saved. Those are the true believers, right? So here it says, all that dwell on the earth worship the beast, except the ones whose names are... So there's only 2 camps here. There's no, well, I don't know. I'm not going to worship him, but I'm not going to follow Jesus. The judgments that have happened so far in this 7-year period seem to have pushed people into a place where they have to make a choice. Now they're going to either be put to death and not be able to buy and sell stuff. We'll see that later on in the passage. In the economy, which is completely controlled by this world empire. And all they have to do is just bow down and say they worship the guy and take his little mark. Okay, fine, I'll do it. The Christians are going to be the only ones who don't do it. The true believers are going to be the only ones who don't do it. And that's why you have this dichotomy. You only have 2 different camps. And I can show you this consistently throughout the book. Revelation 14 says there's only 2 camps. 14 verse 9. Every time the mark of the beast is mentioned, it's clear that you take it, you're not in the Lamb's book of life. You can't be saved. You can't go into the kingdom of God. You don't take it, you're dead. Unless you're in the Lamb's book of life, then some of those who are going to live. So there's really only 2 camps. Revelation 14 verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture in the cup of his indignation. You will receive without mixture, like the full wrath of God all the way. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of his holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. You are going to eternal hell if you take the mark of the beast, period. No way out. Okay, Revelation 14, 11 continues, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, whoever receiveth the mark of his name. Right? Revelation chapter 15, verse 2. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over the number of his name stand on the sea of glass having harps of God. Here's all the saints, and they do not take the mark. They do not have the mark. Then you have chapter 16, verse 2, which again talks about the mark of the beast. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worship his image. Okay, verse 9 through 11. And the men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which had power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the 5th angel poured out his vial upon the sea. By the way, they did not repent. No matter what happens, they won't repent. The fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and the kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. They do not repent once they take the mark of the beast. And then you go to Revelation 19, verse 20, and you see what happens to them again. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, and which he deceived them, with which he had deceived them that received the mark of the beast. He deceived them that received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast into the lake of burning fire, fire burning with brimstone. And then Revelation chapter 20, verse 4, and I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image. So whenever we see the mark of the beast mentioned, it's this all-encompassing. Everyone who takes the mark of the beast does not become a believer. And if you do not take the mark of the beast, you must be a believer. It's like that's the only reason why you wouldn't take it. Or at least that seems to be the obvious implication of Revelation 13, verse 8. All that dwell on the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life. This seems pretty straightforward. I don't think we have any middle-of-the-road camp here, which is why I think the only people that go into the eternal kingdom of God are believers. Now, they might have children, and those children, over time rebel at the end of the 1,000 years. I think that's probably the true. But I think we only have believers going into the kingdom of God. I don't think we have anyone who's in the middle there. So there's that. Now, verse 9 says, if any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. So we have two verses here, 9 and 10, that are really just reassuring, right? They're just saying, listen, this is going to happen, but don't forget that the person who's doing this is going to be judged. He's he's taking the sword against God's people, but God is going to take the sword against him, and he's going to get his. This is a reference, of course, to what we just read in Revelation 19, that the beast and the false prophet are going to be taken, they're going to be cast into the abyss, into the bottomless pit, and then cast into hell for all of eternity. That is mentioned very clearly in Revelation 19 and in Revelation 20. It's specifically said that this beast ends up in eternal fire. I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face... Oh, I'm sorry, right here it's verse 10. I'm reading one verse too far. The devil that had deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever. So the beast and the false prophet go straight into the lake of fire. They're the first ones to go to the lake of fire for 1,000 years, and then the devil joins them. So you have this unholy trinity. All of them are going to end up in the lake of fire, which is what Revelation is saying here in verses 9 and 10. Hey, just be patient. Give it 3.5 years, and then I'm going to take care of this. All right. Okay, so there we go. Now we get to the two probably most interesting parts of chapter 13, and that is, first we have a section from verse 11 until verse 15, which is talking about this false prophet that comes, another beast coming up out of the earth, who has 2 horns like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. And then we have from 16 to 18, and that's the mark of the beast and the number 666. That's going to take us some time to talk about. So let's just talk about this false prophet first in these 5 verses, 11 through 15. Right. First, we'll do 11 and 12. I'll do 11, 12, and 13 altogether. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Okay, now, we already know what a dragon is. The dragon represents Satan. He's speaking like a dragon. Remember, the dragon gave the first beast the power to speak blasphemies, and now this one is speaking like a dragon. But notice he doesn't look like a dragon, right? He looks sweet and cuddly. He looks like a little lamb with 2 little tiny, soft little lamb horns popping up out of his head. Now, this, I think, is incredibly important, but give me a second. Let me read just a little further before I go through and explain why this is a reference to Daniel chapter 8. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and so he is empowered by the Antichrist kingdom. The Antichrist kingdom says, you go out and do whatever you want. You have full authority to do all of these things. He's empowered to do what? And he causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. Okay, so he is first a false prophet. He's going to do miracles, some kind of, whether they look like miracles or they are miracles, to convince people to worship the beast. Now this is, you say, well, how do you know it's a false prophet? Well, because he's called that going forward for the rest of the book of Revelation. In Revelation 16, verse 13, it says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. There's your unholy trinity there. The dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So the second beast, to distinguish him from the first beast, is going to be just called a false prophet going forward. It's mentioned again in Revelation chapter 19, verse 20. We just read that, but I'll read it to you again. When they're thrown into the lake of fire, and the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, which was he that deceived and that received them that had received the mark of the beast. So again, this lamb beast with 2 horns is going to be called the false prophet going forward. And again, you see that in chapter 20 when it mentions that they are tormented day and night. The beast and the false prophet are there. Right? So going forward, Revelation is going to refer to this beast as the false prophet. So let's go back and see then what it talks about it. He does these great wonders in order to deceive them. Now, the idea that he's a lamb with 2 horns is, I think, very important. So let me talk about the wonders, and then we'll get back to what that image of the lamb is. I know I'm going a little backwards there. But notice that it says that he does great wonders, verse 13, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. Now, remember what the 2 witnesses were doing in Revelation 11? I will give power, verse 3, to my 2 witnesses. They shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. If any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. Right? This is an embarrassing thing for the Antichrist during this time, because I laid out what I think is happening here is this is going to be halfway through that 7-year period. The Antichrist is going to kill the 2 witnesses. They're going to rejoice over it, but 3.5 days later, they rise from the dead and ascend into heaven. Well, that's going to make him look pretty bad. So then he's going to walk in and declare himself to be God, and he needs someone to do miracles like those witnesses were doing to say that he was more powerful than the witnesses. And that seems consistent, because it does seem like we're doing a 2 witnesses type of a miracle here in Revelation 13, where he is, verse 13, he doeth great wonders so that he maketh fire come down from heaven in the sight of men. Like, look, I'm just as powerful as those 2 witnesses. The true God is the Antichrist, and go worship him. That seems to be what's going on here. It's a 2 witnesses type of a miracle. Now, is it a real miracle, or are they doing some kind of pyrotechnics, or are they doing something like that? Let me talk about that when we get to in a minute, but I'm just going to say, who knows? Right? It could certainly be a true miracle because Satan's behind it, right? Now, it can't be as powerful as like God's miracles, but there could be something supernatural going on there. But it also could just be like, yeah, he's just fooling people and making them think that it's a miracle. It's really difficult to tell, but the text presents it as if it's a real miracle. So I think we'll just assume it's let's see if I can say this. It's a satanic miracle, I would say. All right, so now let's go back to the imagery here of the lamb. Obviously, he's coming up out of the earth, and he has 2 horns like a lamb. The word lamb is going to remind us of Jesus, right? In Revelation chapter 5, Jesus appears as a lamb slain from the foundation of the world, right? He's the lamb who's slain. He's got 7 eyes and all of that. Let's talk about the seven spirits of God. We talked about that back when we were back in chapter 5. Now we have another beach. He looks like a lamb. He this seems to be, let me just kind of make a not too big of a jump here to say this is probably, since we know he's a false prophet, he probably presents himself in a Christian sort of manner, as if he was worshiping the Christ, but he points the worshipers to the Antichrist. Why? Well, because the Antichrist wants to take the authority and the worship of Christ. The Antichrist is going to claim himself to be God, and so somebody who pretends to worship God is going to point at the Antichrist and say, he's God, he's Christ, he's the Messiah. So it makes sense then that he comes up and he looks like a lamb. But I think the fact that he has two horns is very important. Now, we won't go back and do this. Go back. Guys can go back and watch my video on Daniel chapter 8. But remember in Daniel chapter 8, there was a prophecy about a Greek king from back in the 2nd century BC. Daniel in the 6th century BC talking about a Greek king that's going to be 200 or 300 years later, several hundred years later. And this king, Antiochus Epiphanes, was going to come and commit an abomination of desecration in the temple. He was going to desecrate it, make it unusable, offer pig's blood on the altar. And this is what Antiochus Epiphanes did when he came. But it's interesting that Antiochus's kingdom begins with a goat, somewhat similar to a sheep, not exactly the same, but you understand the parallels and the contrast being between a sheep and a goat. That kingdom was represented by a goat, and 4 horns came up out of the goat, and one of those horns ended up being Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, yeah. Anyway, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm just simplifying it for you here. All right, so he's 1 horn on a goat, where now we have 2 horns on a lamb, right? And one of the interesting things about Antiochus Epiphanes is when he came into Israel, he was a Greek king who controlled the land of Israel, and he didn't like the Jews or the fact that they were worshiping God. He wanted them to worship him. So he gave away the priesthood of Israel, first to a guy named Jason, who wasn't an authentic priest. He wasn't in the line of the priests. But then he sold the high priesthood from Jason and gave it to a guy named Menelaus. Menelaus wasn't even a Levite. Like he had no legitimate place as the high priest. And Menelaus went in, so you have 2 false high priests that he put up. I think that fits well with the imagery of the 2 horns. And what do these 2 false high priests go in and do? They go in to the temple and they start setting up Greek practices and Greek gods, an image to Zeus in the temple, forcing the Jews to worship false gods in the temple of God. Even Zeus, who supposedly Antiochus considered himself to be Zeus incarnate, so it was like an image of Antiochus. So what happens in Daniel chapter 8 is exactly the imagery that's being drawn on in Revelation 13. Notice this. Revelation 13 is saying a Daniel 8 type thing is going to happen. Remember when Antiochus went into the temple and declared himself to be God and hired false prophets or false priests to declare him as God and set up images and force people to worship him? That's exactly the thing that's going to happen in the end times. That is what this is supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like what happened in Daniel chapter 8. Now, I say all of that because a postmillennial says this all happened in the 1st century. Nothing like this happened in the 1st century. No one went into the temple. No false Antichrist walked into the temple and paid people to convince others that he was God and to worship him as God. That never happened anywhere. Now, I'm going to show you how the postmillennials try to say that this is already fulfilled. We're going to get to their arguments in a minute. I'm just saying this is referencing Antiochus Epiphanes and his setting up of false priests to set up idols to him in the temple and to cause Israel to worship him. That is a very direct, very specific prophecy, and it's exactly what we read in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, isn't it? 2nd Thessalonians chapter 2, what does it say is going to happen? Here's what it says, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the Antichrist is going to oppose and exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And then it says that his coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. So there's going to be these false miracles that deceive people into believing that he is in fact God. And he's going to come in and claim to be God in the temple. That's just exactly like Antiochus Epiphanes, except Antiochus Epiphanes hired high priests who were not doing miracles in the temple. But otherwise, it's exactly what we're talking about here. He sits in the temple of God. An image is placed in the temple in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. This is all the same imagery, but remember that 2 Thessalonians is written after the time of the Greek Empire, looking at something that's still going to happen in the future. The Greek Empire wasn't the fulfillment of it. It was just a picture of the fulfillment. The final fulfillment has to be still in the future, and it did not happen in the first century. It didn't happen. Jesus says this as well. We read it in Matthew 24, starting in verse 15. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Someone's coming into the temple and claiming he is God in the holy place. In the holy place of the temple. Okay? We'll talk more about this in just a minute, but that is clearly what's happening here, and false signs are being given to reinforce it. Let's look at the last two verses before we get to the mark of the beast. So, Revelation chapter 13, verses 14 and 15. So here's verse 14, which says, "And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live." That's exactly, not exactly, but it's very, very similar. It's clearly drawing on the imagery of Antiochus Epiphanes, who hired false priests to set up an image to him, to Zeus, in the temple. Here, this false prophet is going to set up an image to the beast, an idol. And here is where it does maybe, how do you make an image to the whole nation? It seems like here the image to the beast is an image to the man, the Antichrist. But it says he had the wound by a sword and did live. So here it seems almost like he was wounded by somebody, stabbed him and he survived. So again, I think we default to saying this is talking about the man who represents the whole kingdom, he's setting up an image to the man, but the man represents the kingdom, and the kingdom is the kingdom that had the sword, the wound and survived, the kingdom of Rome. But it could also be talking about the Antichrist getting a wound and then recovering, right? We'll know when we get there. That's certainly possible. All right. And verse 15, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast be killed." Okay, so the image of the beast is doing some stuff here, miraculously. It is speaking, like if you go and bow down to the image, it's going to speak to you. Now, a lot of people have said this has to be AI. It has to be AI. AI is used to speak. Well, I don't know, because I don't know that people would think of that as a miracle, right? If they could explain it. Somehow this is inexplicable to them, so that it seems like a genuine miracle. Now, could it be a false miracle? Again, maybe. But again, 2 Thessalonians says all power and signs and lying wonders. Does lying wonders mean that it's not a true wonder, like it's not a true miracle? Or does lying wonders mean it's a true miracle that gets you to believe a lie? I think it's the latter one. I think these are true supernatural things that are happening. And so there's a supernatural thing that's happening where demons are causing this image of this beast to speak to people who go in to bow down to it. And so they, are convinced that it's really, that he's really God. And if you don't bow down to it, he's the one, the false prophet's the one who's ordering people to be killed, which again is what happened. Menelaus was running Israel on behalf of, using the power of the King Antiochus back in the Greek Empire, just like it says The lamb with the two horns exerciseth the power of the first beast before him. That's exactly what was happening back in the Greek Empire. Menelaus was putting Jewish people to death who wouldn't break Jewish law and go in and worship Zeus in the temple. And he was doing it under exercising the power of the Greek Empire. So that's what's going to be happening in this time. The Antichrist is going to claim, I'm God, and then he's going to have a puppet, a prophet who's going to go around and say, look, now everybody's got to worship him. Now everyone has to worship him. And maybe the Antichrist is like, oh, I don't need, that's okay. That's okay. And everyone's like, no, we'll worship you. I don't know if that's how it's going to work. But whatever, he's not going to be leading his own worship. The false prophet's going to be leading his own worship. And many have suggested the false prophet could be, the Pope or the you can pick whatever religious institution you don't like and say that that's going to be the false prophet. We'll talk about how the Catholicism probably plays into this in Revelation chapter 17 when we talk about the city of Rome. But for now, I don't see any connection between the false prophet and Catholicism necessarily. He does have some connection to fake Christianity because he's like a lamb, but I think that's obviously going to be the case because he's telling people to worship a fake Christ. So he's going to be a fake Christian, right? So there's the false prophet. Okay, we'll put this all together in just a minute. Let me just talk about the mark of the beast, and then we'll talk about other views on this, because I'm trying to give you first what I think just comes flowing out of the text automatically, and then we'll talk about other ideas and trying to respond to those. Okay, so what we've established so far is that there is this appears to be this revived Roman Empire, 10 kings that are led ultimately by one ruler, the Antichrist, who is so powerful people are in awe of him, and he declares himself to be God. And there is a false prophet who comes to force everybody to worship him as God, to set up an image to him in the temple, sitting in the holy place. That's what it says in Matthew. He's going to sit in the temple. That's what it says in 2 Thessalonians. That seems to be talking about the image of this guy's going to set up an idol in the temple. Now, here's what they do. Here's how they enforce this whole system. It is to mark those who have worshipped the image. Okay, how do you know which of these people have worshipped this image or not? Everyone is ordered to worship the image, but it's not like they're going around all the time wearing the image around their neck, and worshiping it. Like every time you see somebody, hey, quick, bow down and worship this image. No, they have to go to a certain place and worship the image. Maybe it's everyone has to go to Jerusalem to worship the image. Maybe it's they set up different places all around the world, but one of them's in Jerusalem where you can worship the image. I don't know. But at any rate, everyone has to worship the image. And how do you know who has and who hasn't? Because if you worship the image, then you're not a Christian. Like you don't worship Christ, the true Christ. All right? That's been made very clear. So this is their way to identify who are Christians and who are not, so that they can go ahead and kill all the Christians. That's why I think the seal in Revelation 7 that's set on believers is probably not a visible seal. That's not like some kind of literal visible thing on their head, because otherwise they would be able to identify those who did not worship the beast. Here, they need a way to identify them. So here's what he's going to do. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Okay, so the mark of the beast, the number of his name, or his name, the number or his name. Okay, so here's the idea of the mark of the beast. It is a visible sign so that they can catch people who aren't worshiping, who refuse to worship the image. If you have no mark on you, they're going to drag you into a place where you can worship this image, and they're going to say, worship the image. You don't worship the image, we're going to kill you. You worship the image, we'll give you the mark, and then you won't have to come back in here. Right? So the mark seems like it has to be, the practical use of the mark seems like it has to be a visible thing. It has to be something that's like on your forehead. That's why it's forehead or right hand. Right? These are not parts of your body that are covered by clothing, so that they are easily seen, so they can obviously spot people who are not taking the mark, right? Because it's going to be a requirement. You cannot buy or sell. You cannot be part of the world economy, and we're going to kill you. If someone tries to buy your goods, you cannot sell it to someone who doesn't have the mark. You cannot sell or buy or let anyone buy anything. You can't sell to or buy from anyone who doesn't have the mark on their forehead or on their hand. And if you find somebody, let us know, and we'll come out and we'll kill them, or we'll drag them into the center and force them to worship, and then we'll kill them if they don't. See, that seems to be the purpose. So when people say, well, it could be a microchip or something, I don't know. I mean, whatever technology they want to use, I suppose. But the microchip wouldn't be like the main thing. The whole point of this passage is like, this is obvious. You're seen. It's there so that people can spot you. You're walking down the street. He doesn't have the mark. Go get him, right? So the mark is visible. That's why it says forehead or hand. If it was a microchip, it could go anywhere, right? It could go in your foot. It could go in your back. It could go in your neck. It could go anywhere. The reason it has to be forehead or hand is because it's a mark. It's a visible thing that people are going to spot. And that would be easy to spot in your hand or in your forehead. Hey, and you get options. You can have it either in your hand or in your forehead. And you don't have to have one thing. It's either a number or it's his name. So you can stamp the name of the Antichrist on you, or you can stamp a number in place of the name. And the number is 666. Okay, we're going to talk about what the 666 means. I do think we're probably doing like some gematria here. We'll talk about what that means. But I don't think that this is going to be someone that we already know. So here's the thing. Gematria, am I pronouncing that right? Let me just look that up, make sure that would be really embarrassing if I'm not pronouncing it right. I think it's gematria. Yeah. Hey, well, we're just going to go with it. Gematria. Gematria. That's how I've always called it. Okay. So gematria is basically taking letters and causing them to represent numbers, and then taking those numbers and seeing which people's names end up at 666. And the problem is a lot of people who do this are doing it with English letters, which is nonsense. The Bible wasn't written in English, so that wouldn't be what he's talking about. I think there's a lot of good theories on this. And most people would say it's probably Hebrew letters that we're talking about here, because Hebrew gematria is actually pretty well established. Hebrew letters have numerical values. Their numbers are letters, as I understand them. So when they have a name, each of those letters also equal a number, and you could add up each of the numbers that each of the letters represent and have a number, right? So if you add them up to 666, then that name would work in the gematria. Here's the thing. A lot of names will work for that gematria, right? It's like a lot of different, it's not just 2 plus 2 that equals 4. 3 plus 1 equals 4. 1 plus 3. 4 plus 0. 5 minus 1. There's a lot of things that equal 4. So there's a lot of different combinations that would equal 666. So what I'm saying is, it's the number of his name, sure. And that's probably talking about a gematria scenario where you have Hebrew, that name in Hebrew has a specific numerical value that ends up equaling 666. But why we would think this is something that we could figure out based on, we could figure out who's the Antichrist based on the number. Well, then why did John say the Antichrist is revealed when he sits in the temple as God? He would just be revealed when his name came around. And the reason why you can't use the name to figure out who is the Antichrist before he issues the mark of the beast is because more than one name works this way, guys. This is why there's so many. Oh, look at it. Hitler's name works out to 666. And look at it. Barack Obama's name. Everybody's name. And if you try hard enough, you can make it work. If you spell it wrong, you know. And that's what happens. Everyone's name ends up being working out in the gematria to make it out to 666. And you just try to make it work with whatever theory you already have. And gematria is like that. There's a lot of ways to get to 666, and you could just add a title, add a suffix, add a this, or add whatever. Find a way to get there, and you can get there. And the problem is the 666 is not to identify who is the Antichrist, right? Just because their name happens to work out in a gematria way to be 666 doesn't mean that they're the Antichrist, right? More than one person could be called Nero Caesar. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Does that mean everyone who's named Nero Caesar is the Antichrist? No. The idea is that when the Antichrist does come, he will issue this order, and the order will include the number 666. That will be the number of his particular name. And that is significant because the number 6 is the number of man throughout the Bible, for it is the number of a man, right? The number 6 is often used to represent men. It's because it's just one short of perfection. It's like imperfect, right? Number 7 is the number of perfection. So 6 3 times, 666 is the number of a man. Look at that. That's the idea. He is like the epitome of less than perfect. He is less than perfect 3 times because it's an unholy trinity, and there's all this symbolism here in the 666. There's no doubt. The amillennial who looks at this and says, well, there's a lot of symbolism here, is absolutely right. There's a lot of symbolism going on here. Okay, so I don't think that we can find out who the Antichrist is based on the number. I think that when the Antichrist starts, the name the Antichrist happens to have is super symbolic, and once you break it down to numbers, it's like, oh, wow, it represents how imperfect he is, right? It's sort of like a reminder of how evil he is. So it's not a way to identify who the Antichrist is. Let me now rewind. Now that I've kind of walked through the passage, let me talk about the views, especially of the postmillennials, because an amillennial, I think, is going to have a real hard time with this, because obviously there's symbolic spiritual meaning here. I mean, yeah, the number of a man and all that kind of stuff. But it's also referencing Daniel, and Daniel is talking about real kingdoms, conquering real kingdoms. And there's real things going on in the book of Daniel. And this is clearly quoting the book of Daniel and giving further information. If it was just spiritual meaning, then all the spiritual meaning would be done in Daniel. Why would you need to do it again? It's doing it again because giving further information, further added details to Daniel. So I don't think you can look at this and say, oh, amillennial, let's just interpret it idealistically. Like it's all these ideas, spiritual ideas. I don't think you can do that. I think that's very poor interpretive method. But the postmillennial, he's going to have here's what all of this means. And if I can boil it down, it's Nero. That's the postmillennial view. Okay, so let me show you a little bit of a few charts here just to get you thinking where I'm thinking, so that we're on the same page. Let me show you again the postmillennial chart, which I think is there it is. Okay, remember, postmillennials believe pretty much all this prophecy is fulfilled in 70 AD. That Jesus returned in sort of a figurative way in 70 AD, and all the way up through Revelation 19 is already done. It was fulfilled in the first century. Okay, so whatever's happening here in Revelation 13 has to have already happened. So they'll say it all happened in the persecution that came on the Christians during the time of the Emperor Nero, which would be in the 60s AD. Okay, well that is just. It's really, I'm going to try to show you how impossible that actually is. It doesn't work. It does not work. But we'll look at the actual dates and the times and all this. So being in the time of Nero is essentially what they're going to say. So if we go back to the premillennial timeline, the premillennial is going to have something like this for those last 7 years. That is, let me pull it up where you can see me as well. There we go. Okay. You have 7 years. The first half, I would say, is probably the seal judgments, because that's all covered in seal judgments and the trumpet judgments. That's all covered in Revelation 6 through 11. Chapter 11, 12, and 13 are like this middle point in the middle. And then 13 through 18 seem to be the end, the last 3.5 years, especially starting in chapter 15. 14 is going to be interesting. Can't wait to study that one with you next time. Okay, so in the middle, you have the abomination of desolation, very consistent with Daniel, Matthew, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Revelation. It's all very, very consistent. You have a 7-year covenant that starts the whole 7 years. That's according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. You have the return of Christ at the end. And I think you probably have the bowl judgments right before Jesus returns. It's like the last couple weeks before Christ returns. Probably. We'll talk more about that when we get to the bowl judgments in chapters 15 and 16. Okay, the Great Tribulation would be that war against the saints that happens in the last 3.5 years. And so this is what we think. We think, hey, look, this is going to actually happen. The Antichrist is going to establish his kingdom in the first 3.5 years, and then he's going to walk into Israel and claim to be God, and he's going to set up a false prophet to force people to worship him and start the mark of the beast thing. And I even mentioned how there's probably a 30-day gap, according to the days that are mentioned in Daniel. Daniel talks about a 3.5-year time period in which that goes from the abomination of desolation until the end, until Jesus returns. But it talks about it as a 3.5-year time period, and then it says it's a 1,335-day time period. So there's like extra days in there. And I think the reason is because you have the abomination of desolation starts probably a few months before the exact middle of those 7 years. But they're given a bit of time to enforce all of this. Like, you can still buy and sell for a little while. You have like a 30-day grace period until you get the mark. And then 30 days from now, if you don't have the mark, we're going to kill you. So that gives the people who are in Jerusalem time to flee to the mountains. That's what Jesus said. When you see the abomination of desolation, run to the mountains, right? That's what you need to do. You need to get out. You only have a little bit of time to get out of here and to get to a safe place, which also means they're probably going on foot. Probably a lot of their technology is destroyed. That'd be explained easily by the seal and trumpet judgment. So that's what's happening. Probably you have like a 30-day window where they say you have 1 month to take the mark of the beast, to get in here to worship the image and take the mark. And then we're going to kill everyone. And so the actual persecution starts a little later, and that's why you have different numbers. You have 1,260 days, 1,290 days, and then 1,335 days. I'll talk about that actually in one of my sermons that I'm going to put up soon, and we'll talk about that more when we get further into the study as well. So that's what I think is happening. We have the seal judgments, and then we have the Great Tribulation. But the postmillennial says all of this was fulfilled in the 1st century. So let me give you kind of, this is from Steve Gregg's book here, the Revelation. Revelation 4 Views Revised and Updated. It seems obvious to me that Steve is postmillennial. He seems very in support, so very much in support of the postmillennial view. But what I like about this book is that it breaks down different views. The idealist, the preterist, the futurist. Preterist would be postmillennial. Futurist would be premillennial. And then you have idealist, that's amillennial, and historicist, that's a different thing. We'll talk about that some other time. So I love that, because he's going to go to one passage and say, here's what this person would say about it. Here's what this person. So that's pretty helpful. And he has what I think is, he seems to lean very heavily towards the preterist, it's already fulfilled perspective. So here's what they're going to say on the name. But let me just look at some of the things that that happen here before we get to the number, the mark of the beast number. Notice, of course, that in this mark of the beast, it is there's a couple different options. And it's only two, really. That no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. And then it says, or the name of the beast. That or isn't actually in the text. I think, so that's something that as the King James translators were translating, they're like, the mark, the name, well, it seems like it needs to have or. But probably what's happening here, because the comma isn't there either, it's probably saying that the mark has to be one or the other. It's either the name of the beast or the number. So you have a name or a number, one of those two things. Okay, so that's very specific. Why would that need to be so specific if this was all idealist, if this was all figurative and symbolic? I don't think there's a good answer from a amillennial view here on why we need to have so many specifics on symbolic spiritual truths. This seems to be specific on purpose because it's actually how it's going to play out. But if you look up at the beginning of the chapter, you have the beast coming up out of the sea. And then you have a second beast that's coming up out of the earth. Notice that the beast come up out of the earth. That's the lamb, the false prophet. So the one is going to looks like it's coming up out of the earth. Some say that maybe that's the false prophet is Jewish. The earth, maybe earth means Israel. I don't think so. There's land is usually more what they'll use to say Israel, the land. The earth probably just means like, yeah, he's not a demon himself. He is a human. He comes from the earth. But he's not like from all the nations like the other beast. The other beast comes out from all the nations of the seas. This beast comes up from the earth. He's just a regular guy, but he's given this extra power, right? So a postmillennial is going to say this has to be fulfilled in the first century. So how is it fulfilled in the first century? Well, they said basically there was a cult of people, the cult of the emperor. And the emperor of Rome, the Caesars, were all worshipped as God. And there was this whole cult of the emperor that would go around trying to convince people to worship the emperor. Okay, like, all right, like there's a parallel, but that's in like every kingdom ever. Like there's nothing unique about that. Like you can predict that. In Egypt, the Egyptian pharaoh was worshipped as God, and there was a cult of people that worshipped him as God and forced other people, the priests that worshipped him as God, right? That happened in Babylon. It happened in Persia. It happened in Greece in some Greek kings. Happened in Rome. Happened in all of these ancient empires. Happened in Babel. So, this idea that simple basic fact that's always the case in these major empires is like the fulfillment of this is kind of silly. I don't think that works. But they say, yeah, so it was Nero. Nero is the beast. Nero is the guy. And but here's the problem. The beast here is fulfilling the prophecies of the abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation, a postmillennial is going to say, is either when Jesus was crucified on the cross, which would have been not when Nero was the emperor. That would have... I'm sorry, who was the emperor? Why am I forgetting the emperor? List of emperors of Rome. Why am I... See, I tried to commit this to memory earlier. The first century emperors of Rome, and I keep forgetting them. I should figure this out. Let's see. Okay. Tiberius, right? Yeah, because he was emperor till 37. So Tiberius Caesar would have been the emperor during the time of Christ, not Nero, right? So, and then you say, well, maybe the abomination of desolation is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. Well, that was Titus. Titus Vespasius was the emperor, and his son Titus was the one who was the general who was conquering the city. But you don't have Nero as the abomination of desolation. So then you have to separate Romans 13 from the abomination of desolation. Revelation 13 is not talking about the abomination of desolation if you are a postmillennial. But yet it's clearly using all the wording and the timing and the 3.5 years, all that kind of stuff. That's what Daniel was talking about when it talks about an abomination. And it's when you see the abomination, that's when all this stuff happens. When you see the abomination, flee into the mountains because there'll be great tribulation, war on the saints, all that kind of stuff. That's supposed to happen when you see the abomination. But now it has to happen in the time of Nero in the 60s AD because Nero persecuted Christians. All right. But why are we being so arbitrary with this? Why aren't we following the very consistent flow of the text? Why are we trying to move this all around? None of this makes sense. Jesus says, after the abomination, flee to the mountains, then will be great tribulation. He's referencing Daniel, which says that this one guy stands up in a kingdom and he takes down 3 other kings and he wars against the saints. And then it says that he's going to do it for 1,290 days, 1,335 days. We talked about the difference there between that and exactly 3.5 years. But this is exactly, this goes one right after the other. 2 Thessalonians talks about the same thing, the same guy mentioned in Daniel 11, declaring himself to be God. And then he goes and he deceives the world. And after that is something to worry about. After that is something to worry about, according to the beginning of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And here, Revelation 13, perfectly consistent, follows exactly what we've been studying. I think the eschatology only gets confusing and convoluted when you're listening to weirdos saying weird things that don't have any basis in the text. I think if you're just following the text, it's really not that hard. And I think it's just a lot of weird people say a lot of weird stuff about it. But I don't think it's that hard. It's very consistent. It's all the way through. Anyway, so how could this be Nero? They're saying it's Nero in the cult of the emperor. Or maybe it's Nero and there's bad Jews who were trying to get people to worship Nero in the temple. Where is that? Where do you find that in history? Well, there was a lot of bad Jews. Josephus wrote about some bad Jews. Okay, well, this is one guy, not a group of bad Jews or a group of emperor cults. There's got to be one guy who stands up who kind of fulfills this prophecy. And there's no one guy in any ancient writing anywhere that we know of who stood up and tried to convince people to worship Nero in like any kind of special way. He certainly, as far as we know, there's no one who's doing these miracles to get people to worship. You see, you can do this general thing and say, generally speaking, this could be fulfilled by the cult of the emperor. But when did they call fire down out of heaven? When did that happen? And why does the scripture say he'll call fire down out of heaven if it doesn't have any meaning? Right? I mean, when did they put up an image to Nero in the temple and do miracles to make it speak to people? And if they didn't do that, then why does the scripture say it? Like, these things seem like, why are we ignoring the details here, postmillennials? Well, you know, they did. They brought coins to Caesar into the temple, and the coins and the Roman armies destroyed the temple. Wait a minute. Now we're in the Roman armies destroying the temple instead of in Nero's time? What's happening in Nero's time, guys? Well, yeah. Well, they and they'll just come up with all these like really, really weak arguments. And every time they come up with a fulfillment in the first century, if you take that one fulfillment that maybe fulfills one phrase of Revelation 13 and you compare it with the rest of Revelation 13, it doesn't fit. So you've got to keep coming up with brand new, weird things. And what they're doing is they're recognizing that in the first century, there were a lot of like shadow things that were like, oh, this is going to be like what it is in the end times. But there's no actual fulfillment of these things. Now, here's something interesting, because people say Nero's name equals 666. I'm going to read to you from Revelation, the Four Views, revised and updated by Steve Gregg, okay? One of the major evidences for identifying the beast with Nero is this information about the number of his name. Here, using English characters, the Hebrew form of Caesar, Nero, is Neron Osir, pronounced Neron Kaiser. The value of the 7 Hebrew letters in that is 50, 200, 6, 50, 100, and 60, and 200, respectively. The total is thus 666. This is the solution advocated by David S. Clark, Jay Adams, Kenneth Gentry, David Chilton, and most others. So The very popular postmillennial argument is that the 666 here in Revelation 13 is referring to Nero, because Nero Caesar in Gematria equals 666 in Hebrew Gematria. And they'll say, here's like, I'm going to just try to steel man their case. They'll say, listen, John couldn't write that the beast is Nero because John was writing during the time of Nero. Now, I don't think he was writing during the time of Nero. We don't have any good evidence for that. But they'll say, John was writing during the time of Nero, so since he was writing during the time of Nero, he couldn't just come out and say Nero. So he had to do something sort of sly. So he used the number, but the number only works in Hebrew so that only Hebrews can understand what it means. Yeah, well, he's writing to churches in Turkey, so they might not speak Hebrew either. It's a very good chance that nobody in the 7 churches could speak Hebrew, or a very few of them could. In maybe 1 or 2 of the churches, there's somebody who speaks Hebrew, but it's very possible that the people he's speaking to don't speak Hebrew. The Jews who lived outside of Jerusalem, many of them did not speak Hebrew. They were Greek-speaking Jews. So some of them might have, but he's writing to 7 churches in Turkey, not in Jerusalem or in Israel. So yeah, there's no reason to think that he'd be talking about a Hebrew Gematria. Besides the fact that Gematria can work out for anybody, just about anybody. In fact, I had AI run Gematria and see how many other Roman emperors they could make work with Gematria, and they found a way to make Domitian, Titus, Vespasius, Caligula, and several others work. And the reason is because we're saying it's not just Nero, it's Nero Caesar. Because Nero Caesar wasn't his name. His name was Nero. Or his title would have been Imperator Nero Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He is most often in ancient sources called Nero, or Caesar, or Imperator Nero Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or maybe just Imperator, or maybe Augustus, or maybe Claudius. But it's actually pretty rare in ancient writings that he's called Nero Caesar. But you have to have him called Nero Caesar or Caesar Nero in order to get your 666. And that's not what they usually called him. So, again, could that be what John was saying? Technically, the Gematria could work with Nero Caesar. I'm just saying that's unlikely. And here's another statement from postmillennials. This is from Chilton, David Chilton. Again, Stephen Gregg in this book is Steve Gregg is quoting other postmillennials, preterists, and here's what he says: all the earliest Christian writers on the apocalypse, from Irenaeus down to Victorinus of Patou, and Commodian in the 4th, and Andreas in the 5th, and Saint Benedictus in the 8th century, connect Nero to some Roman emperor with the apocalypse beast. That's really deceptive, because Irenaeus did not connect Nero. Irenaeus was the first person. Okay, if you look at the 1st century and the 2nd century, the only one in that list from the 1st and 2nd century is Irenaeus. Irenaeus is towards the end of the 2nd century, so maybe about 100 years after John wrote this. And Irenaeus does not mention Nero. You would think that somewhere in the 1st and 2nd century, since everybody knew that this was talking about Nero, somebody would mention in their commentary on Revelation that was Nero. Irenaeus writes a whole ton about Revelation and the end times, and never once does he offer Nero as an option. And the other options he makes, he points out that they haven't been fulfilled yet, because he didn't think that they had already been fulfilled. Well, there's a little debate on what Irenaeus is saying in some of these passages, but he doesn't bring up Nero, and he's pointing at other people. He doesn't even count it out to being possibly Nero. If this was so obvious, everybody knew it, which is what they say. The exhortation, "Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast," is one of the clearest indicators that the fulfillment of these prophecies belongs to the 1st century AD. John obviously did not expect his readers who had understanding to have any difficulty in identifying the beast, since they could simply calculate the meaning of his cryptogram. So he didn't expect anyone to have any problem if they had any kind of intelligence. Then how come none of the writers of the 1st and 2nd century church mentioned Nero when they're talking about the book of Revelation? Irenaeus certainly didn't. And he actually did try to count out the number. And he didn't mention Nero. He did not think it was Nero. Why not? Because it wasn't like that everyone's like, oh, it's Nero. It wasn't like, oh, that's easy. No, that's not the case. And the idea that it is silly, besides the fact, of course, that we know that John was not writing during the time of Nero. He was writing during the time of Domitian. But that's a separate thing. I've already talked about that. Here's the problem. Nero's name might fit with the gematria, but so do a lot of names. And you can make names fit there by using different parts of their title, by using different spellings, because names had different spellings back in those days. So you could use different spellings to arrive at the thing you wanted to arrive at. You can have just about anybody could end up equaling 666 if you really try hard enough, and if they have enough titles and enough nicknames and stuff like that you can throw in there to make it work. It's really not that hard. It's just, again, it's like 2 + 2 = 4, so does 5 - 1, and 6 - 2, and so on and so forth. So the idea that we can identify the Antichrist by the gematria is pretty silly. It's that the gematria does work out to 666, and that has a significance to Christians because it reminds us of the number of man times 3, the unholy Trinity. Like, all of that is going on here, and there is a symbolic thing. That's why John mentions it, not because it's a way to identify who it is. Let him that hath understanding count the number, not let him that has understanding figure out who the beast is. He doesn't say that. He says, let him that has understanding count the number, for the number is a number of a man. He's not saying, if you are smart enough, you can identify who the beast is. He's not saying that. He's saying, if you're smart enough, you can figure out the meaning of this number. And the meaning tells you about his nature and who he is. He's a man, he's imperfect, and he's imperfect times 3. There's an unholy Trinity thing going on here, guys. That's the whole genre. That's like the whole meaning of the whole chapter. It's clearly what John's getting at, and it's what he's saying you'll understand about the number. He's not saying that you'll know who the number is pointing to. You'll know who the number is pointing to because when you see the number, it'll be stamped on people's foreheads, and you'll know that's the guy, right? So so anyway, what I'm saying is that I think it's the contextually, there's no expectation that we're going to know ahead of time the name of the Antichrist, or that we're going to see the Antichrist and know him by his number, not by his deeds. He has to do the deeds. Okay, so here's the real question. Did Nero do the things that Revelation 13 says the beast has to do? That's the real question. And the answer is 100% no. He did not do those things. He did some things that are something like the things mentioned in Revelation 13, but he did not do the things. Let me give you a couple things. Okay? Remember what the beast is supposed to do. He's supposed to declare himself to be God. Well, Nero did not do that in a special way. Okay? Nero, like any Caesar, claimed to be God, but just like any other Caesar. He didn't do it in any kind of special way beyond anyone else. So verse 5 says, there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Okay? This is an extraordinary blasphemy, beyond the pale. Nero didn't do that. Nero didn't claim to be God any more than any other Caesar did. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. As far as we know, there's no special kind of Nero blaspheming heaven or the dwelling of God. You say, well, he blasphemed the Jews. Well, I mean, not any more than any other Caesar did, okay? Did he try to kill Christians? Yes, that's a separate thing. But again, That's not what's being said here. This is very specific. Let's look at verse 7. Remember, he's given 42 months. It's about, it's 42 months is 3.5 years. And it's actually 47 months that Nero persecuted Christians. From the fire in Rome until Nero died, he was killing Christians. But he was only killing Christians, as far as we can tell. We have no historical evidence, or at least I haven't found any historical evidence anywhere to suggest that Nero was killing people outside of Rome. He was killing Christians in Rome because he wanted to blame the fire on them and use them as the boogeymen. So he was doing a thing in Rome. It was a Roman persecution, which is why you see in the book of 1 Peter, Peter writes to the scattered, the ones who are scattered all around, because they were in Rome, but once the persecution came to Rome, they all scattered and they went outside of Rome, because outside of Rome they were safe. So Nero was persecuting Christians in the city of Rome, and he was doing it for 47 months, not 42. This is not the amount of time. They'll say, well, maybe he started a little later or ended a little sooner. There's no historical evidence for that. You're just making that up. It's 47 months. We know the time of the fire, and we know the month when the fire happened, and we know the month when Nero died. It was 47 months. I've talked about it in previous videos, so we won't go into detail on that. But again, not Nero. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. Again, that's a very unique kind of a scenario that doesn't seem fulfilled by Nero. It was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Okay, and did Nero overcome the saints? I mean, he killed the saints in Rome. He's killed a lot of saints in Rome. That's a bit of a stretch to say that he just overcame them in like a unique way beyond what anyone else has ever done. And power was given to him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell on the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life. All that dwell on the earth shall worship him. Well, that's not the case. That didn't happen. And remember what it is that's happening here at the end about with the worship of the beast. If you don't worship, you are forced to take a mark, and you can't buy or sell if you don't take the mark and don't worship this beast, and you will be killed. Okay? Nero did not kill everyone who didn't worship him. He tried to kill Christians. He didn't go around killing everyone who didn't worship him. He wanted people to worship him. He was considered a god by the Romans, but he didn't kill everyone who didn't worship him. He killed Christians in Rome. He did not set up an image to himself in the temple of God. He did not cause that image to speak. People say, well, he put up a flag. He put up a flag with an image to himself on the Temple Mount. When usually that argument is usually, I'm just trying to sift through all the postmillennial arguments that I've read and heard. Usually that argument is actually used by Titus. Titus, when he came in and destroyed the temple, he brought in Roman flags into the temple, to the Temple Mount after he destroyed it, and that's the image of the beast. But again, he's not making people worship it, though. Even if there is that, he's not forcing people to worship it. He's not making it speak, and he's not prohibiting people from buying and selling. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you hear postmillennials, you'll hear them talk about the libel. Am I pronouncing it right? Again, I feel like I'm pronouncing it right. Pronouncing it wrong. Let me see if I can get the right. If I can at least get the right spelling in front of me, I can maybe pronounce it correctly. Where is that? It's a libellus. It's a libellus. Okay, so there was these libellus, which was a certificate of compliance, and they would force you to take a pinch of incense and offer it on an altar and say, Kaiser Kurios, Caesar is Lord. And then you'd get the libellus, and then you'd have the certificate of compliance, and you couldn't go and buy and sell stuff in the Roman Empire unless you had a certificate of compliance saying that you worshipped the emperor. Okay, that is a real thing that really happened in history, but it did not happen during the reign of Nero. It didn't happen anywhere in the first century. As far as I can tell, it didn't happen in the second century either. I think, well, there might have been the Decian persecution. That would have been the 3rd century. as far as I can tell, is the latest. So there might have been something similar to that before Decian in the 3rd century, but there's no evidence that Nero ever did that. No evidence. That is something that happened. If it's not a mark, first of all, it's just a piece of paper that says you're compliant and you worship the emperor. So there's something similar to this going on, but it's not a mark. It's not the number of his name. It's not his name. It's none of the things that it needs to be, but it's something like it. It's a foreshadowing of something that will come later. But that didn't even happen in the time of Nero. So what we see then is what a postmillennial needs is for this all to be Nero. And none of it is Nero. None of it can be Nero. It doesn't fit. There's similarities because Nero is a precursor to the Antichrist, just like a lot of people have been, right? Nero, Antiochus Epiphanes, was a precursor to the Antichrist. Nero was a precursor to the Antichrist. Hitler was a precursor to the Antichrist. Okay, there's a lot of precursors like foreshadows. Remember, Paul said the mystery of iniquity is already at work, but someone's restraining him, right? The devil has been trying to bring about the Antichrist for a long time. He's been trying to make it happen. And God just keeps saying no. Okay, so was Nero one of the precursors to the Antichrist? Yes, one of many. Does he fulfill the prophecy of Revelation 13? 100% no. The only thing he fulfills is that his name works with the gematria, which other people's names can also work with the gematria. And the Antichrist, who does fulfill all the other prophecies, his name will also work with the gematria. And probably better. He probably won't need his name plus Caesar. He probably won't need his name plus his title. He'll probably just have his name. It'll probably just be his name, because it doesn't say his title, it says his name. But besides that, the text gives us no expectation that we'll be able to identify the man based on the number. We're identifying his character based on the number. He is like a man. He's imperfect. He's part of an imperfect trinity, 666. The number may well be gematria to his name, but we don't identify names by gematria because lots of names equal the same number in gematria. It's not an identity of the man, it's an identity of his character. It reveals his character, it reveals the types of things he's doing, who he is, that kind of stuff. But it's not like that. So at any rate, here's what we know about the Antichrist, and let's just kind of like dispel a lot of myths, and then we'll get to your questions, okay? Because we finally got through. I thought this was going to be a short stream. It was very long. Okay, so here's what we know. He is going to rule a kingdom of 10 kings. We've already seen that before. We're seeing it confirmed here in Revelation 13. He's going to declare himself to be God. We saw that in Daniel. We saw that in Matthew. We saw that in 2 Thessalonians. We're seeing it again in Daniel. He's going to war against the saints and try to kill all the saints. We saw that in Daniel. We saw that in Matthew. We saw that in 2 Thessalonians. Seeing it again in Revelation 13. He is going to force people to worship him or kill them. And he's going to do that by setting up an image, but with a false prophet coming in and working on his behalf to set up an image and a whole system where you take this mark. Now, the mark is kind of a new thing, right? We didn't see that in Daniel and Matthew or in 2 Thessalonians. The other stuff was there, but how he did it wasn't explained until Revelation 13. It's like further information on the same stuff. And here's how he's going to do it. He's going to make everybody worship him, and then they get a mark that proves that they're compliant. This kind of reinforces a lot of things, like when Jesus says two will be in a field, one's taken, the other left. Well, if that's after the mark of the beast, one of them has the mark of the beast and one of them doesn't. That's a very odd scenario, that they would just be hunky-dory in a field together. Two would be in a bed in Luke 17. One will be taken, the other left. That's a little strange. One's worshiping the beast, the other's ostracized, and if you find him, you're supposed to turn him in so the beast can kill him, and they're in the bed together. That seems a little bit strange. They're grinding at the mill together. All this stuff is like everybody thinks things are normal. But one of them's a Christian, one of them's not. One of them's a believer, one of them's not. That pushes that statement of the two being in the field back to before the abomination of desolation because of this mark that we're learning about in Revelation 13. See? You see how this all ties together and it fits? But there is some systemization that we have to do, okay? Well, this all fits, but since that is true, that must mean this about this other thing. So we'll systematize it and put them together in a way that just fits perfectly. So again, that's why I believe the pre-trib rapture works the best, is the best system that explains the text. But again, feel free to disagree with me on that. Just you need to develop a system that explains the text, not that is trying to twist the text into your view. But all of this is very clearly not fulfilled in the first century, and it's very clearly something very specific about a real empire, I think. And I think we're seeing that every chapter in Revelation, we're seeing that again and again and again. So I think that's clearly going to be the case. In the end times, I believe there'll be a rapture first. Then you'll have 3.5 years of people getting saved, being persecuted, the rise of this empire and all this other stuff. And then you'll have this guy claiming to be God. There will be 144,000 Jewish believers that will be preserved. They'll run into the wilderness and they will be preserved from the anger and wrath of this man who wants to kill everyone who won't worship him. But there'll be many other believers around the world who will be killed during that time because they will refuse to worship the beast. And in all of that, it's really not so sad or so sorry, because we're coming right back with Jesus in 3.5 years. And Jesus will return to bring justice and judgment on the beast and bring in the kingdom of God. This is exciting, guys. This is what we're waiting for. The kingdom of God is on the horizon. And we don't know how far away it is because this whole time period hasn't started. But once it's started, it will be obvious when it will be. It will be 7 years. Especially once the abomination of desolation happens, we have the exact days. 135 days later is when we return with Jesus to the Mount of Olives, destroy the devil, bring all the people of the world to the Valley of Jehoshaphat to be judged, and enter into the kingdom. That's going to be awesome. That's going to be very cool. All right, let's go to your questions. Let's see what you had for me today, and we'll wrap it up with that. Let's see. I'm going to try not to read ones from last month like I did last month. I read a question from the month before. Let's see. I think this is from this month. Yeah. Stan is Lav Angelov. Anyway, that's the YouTube name. How shall we interpret the coming of the false prophet beast from the earth instead of from the sea as the first one? Oh, I got to that one. You didn't think I was going to get to that one, and I did. I squeezed it in at the end. Yeah, I had meant to talk about that, and then as we were going through, I was like, oh, I forgot to mention that. So I think the sea talks about it coming from the nations, and the earth is just like a man, right? Men were formed, Adam was formed out of the dust of the ground. I just think he's just a regular man, where the other beast represents a whole nation. So he comes out of a nation, comes out of nations. Out of many nations, this kingdom arises, and it has a king on it. But this is just one person. He's just one man. He doesn't come from nations. Now, others would say, the earth could also be referred to many peoples of the earth. So he comes from many peoples of the earth. Okay. I just think he's a singular man. He's not a nation. Where the beast represents a nation and a king over the nation, this guy just represents one dude. And I think that's what coming from the earth means. Jules Z for Jesus. What do you think of Revelation 17:8 and 17:11, where the beast comes up out of the abyss and is the 8th ruler? The beast has a deadly head wound. Maybe he comes back to life and comes out of the abyss. Jules, I think I answered that. I want to say that I answered that. Let me just kind of summarize my answer to you again. Essentially, what I think is happening there in Revelation 17 is that there are 7 heads on the beast, but the beast who is mentioned in Revelation 13 is called the 8th. It's like, what's going on? Okay, the 7 heads represents where that beast comes from. And then the whole beast itself is the 8th, right? So the 7 heads represents Babel, Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, New Rome, right? That's where this beast gets all of its power from, all the previous empires. But the whole beast is like a new thing that comes out of that new Roman Empire and is the 8th. I think that's what it's talking about there. And we'll talk about that more when we get to Revelation 17. That is a hard passage to interpret. But actually, personally, when I first started this series, I had studied a lot in Daniel. I'd studied a lot in a lot of passages, but I was really kind of uncertain about what I would finally land on for the correct interpretation of Revelation 17. But as I've done this series and dived deeper and deeper on Daniel and Matthew 24 and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and the first part of Revelation, now like Revelation 17 is becoming easier and easier for me to interpret, especially when you connect it with Revelation 13 and with Daniel 7. You look at Daniel 7 and you get a good grasp on that. Then you look at Revelation 13, you get a good grasp on that. It becomes pretty easy because Revelation 13 has the beast as a lion and a leopard and a bear. That's all the kingdoms that were before, right? So now when we see 7 kings, we can say, well, this could be a succession of kingdoms that lead up to this kingdom, which makes sense because one is, during the time of John, that would be the 6th one, that's Rome. There's another one coming, that's New Rome, and then they're going to give their power to the beast. That's the beast kingdom, which is part of New Rome, but it could be considered the 8th, right? So that's why it's being counted that way, I think. And we'll talk more about that when we get to Revelation 17. That should be, like, let's see, we'll have a month on Revelation 14, a month on 15 and 16 together, and then 17 and 18 together. So 3 months. So what's this? May? So the June, July, that'd be August. Probably do that in August. I think we'll still do that in August. Okay, here's another question. What about the 616 variant? Early papyri such as P115 read 616, not 666, and its equivalence to the Latin spelling of Nero Caesar. Translated into Hebrew, it has been said that this shows early scribes were aware of the different spellings of the same person, and the reality strengthens the argument. Yeah, actually, I don't think so, because the 616 variant, being Nero, is exactly what Irenaeus was talking about in his. He talks about. He's the first person you see mentioning the 616 variant is Irenaeus in the 2nd century. And he's like arguing that that's not what it says and that it can't be Nero, guys. So here's the thing. If this is just so obvious that these people, or just obviously it was Nero, then why did nobody actually mention that, and why was Irenaeus arguing against it? Now, clearly, Irenaeus is arguing against it because it was some sentiment, right? Some people were starting to think maybe this was already fulfilled in Nero. And that's where the 616 variant probably came from, that people were saying, well, maybe it means 616, and that's the spelling that we have for Nero. Maybe they were trying to make it fit with Nero. But the problem is we don't have any like scholarly writing, right? We have errors in the manuscript that change it to 616, right? We have copyists of manuscripts who are making it 616. But any of the theologians of the church, any of the great mind, any of the thinkers of the church, none of them are saying this is Nero. So that, and the one person who's talking about it is saying, guys, stop this. This is silliness. Stop believing this. So you have, like, the great minds of the church are not getting, remember what John said, he that has understanding is going to get this. But yet all the great minds of the church are not getting it in the first couple centuries. The ones who are closest to Nero are not getting it. The ones who are closest to John writing are not getting it. I don't find that to be incredibly a very strengthening argument, because remember that people would copy down, anyone who could write Greek would copy a letter or copy a book of the Bible so they could get it out as quickly as possible. They did a lot of copyists. They didn't have a lot of standards for scribes in the early church, but your early church writers are writing about this and saying, hey, you guys got this wrong, and you're wrong to think that this is Nero. I think that's more, I think Irenaeus arguing against it and no one else arguing for it in the first couple centuries is more powerful than a textual variant. And it kind of shows the kinds of people who were thinking maybe this is Nero. They were people who hadn't studied it out. And for good reason, because when you do study it out, you realize Nero doesn't fit the mold. Now, on that vein, some people have said, well, how come nobody like? Here's a question I get a lot. I'll throw it out because we're in the question time. I do have more questions from you guys, so this isn't the last one. But people will say, well, how come in 2 Thessalonians, when they were worried that they were in the end times, why didn't Paul just say, well, look, the rapture hasn't happened yet, so you can't be in the end times? Well, I think we suppose that the early Christians had systematized. Like what we've just done is doing a lot of systematizing. We looked at Daniel and we said, okay, this is what it seems to be saying. We looked at Matthew 24, this is what it seems to be saying. 2 Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, this is what it seems to be saying. Let's systematize this. If this is true, and this is true, and this is true, then we need to adjust things just a little bit. This one must work out this way in order to fit with that one, and this one must. So we're systematizing it. We're saying these each speak for themselves, but put together, they build a whole system. I think what we have in the first centuries of the church is a lot of recognizing truths and things that are being argued, and not as much systematizing of end times eschatology. Irenaeus is one of the first, is really kind of, as far as I'm aware, he's kind of the first one who goes and tries to give any kind of robust arguments for eschatological things. And he doesn't even like systematize it like we would have today. Most of your systems of eschatology are coming from after the Reformation, when everything starts being systematized. People start systematizing all kinds of doctrines, like the doctrines of grace and the doctrines of soteriology, all this stuff. Like it's all there, but it's not systematized the way that it is after the Reformation, which is why postmillennialism as a system doesn't exist until after the Reformation. Dispensationalism as a system doesn't exist till after the Reformation. They say, well, it's all this is new. Well, it's not new. Like the ideas are all the way through the church history, but they're not systematized till later. So I think that's what's happening. If you look at the first century Christians, they're saying, we know there's going to be a rapture, and we know we're going to be taken out, and we know we're going to miss bad stuff because of the rapture. And we're going to be comforted by this. And it's going to come when people say peace and safety. It's going to come. They know facts, but they haven't systematized it and said, well, if that's true, and there's a taking when people are two in a field, and then, the mark of the beast will prevent them from being two in the field. And oh, well, then I guess we probably are going to be raptured before those 7 years. You see, the pre-trib rapture is something that is born out of a systemization of the facts that we know. It is not that's why people say, well, give me one verse that teaches the pre-trib rapture. Well, no, the pre-trib rapture is based on a system. Now, systems aren't wrong. If it's a good system, if it's based on facts that force the rapture to be at a certain time, that's perfectly fine. But it's not based on, I would say that the pre-trib rapture isn't like a doctrine. It's a system that compiles the doctrines and says these only work this way. This is the only way that makes them fit. So in other words, when we're looking at people looking at 666 and saying in the first and second century, and saying, well, could that be Nero? Because he really persecuted Christians. I remember him persecute. I remember people talking about how much he persecuted Christians. Maybe this is talking about Nero. That's because they hadn't systematized it to say, oh wait, if that's talking about Nero, then the abomination of desolation already happened. And if the abomination of desolation already happened, then there was supposed to be a 42-month war against the saints afterwards. And if there was supposed to be a 42-month war against... You see how Irenaeus is correcting thinking that hasn't come from careful systemization. They haven't really thought through all the ramifications of saying this is Nero. So he's saying, guys, stop it. And again, I think that's also why you don't have any other church fathers who mention that. So, and it's also well agreed that the 616 variant is a variant. It's not what was originally written. John did write 666. And again, the fact that 616 also works for Nero's name kind of tells you how gematria works, doesn't it? Like you could just spell it a little different and you could make it work. And again, I did that for... I didn't do it. I just had AI do the work. And it came out with a half dozen first century Caesars that it could make it work, right? So again, I think it would just be Nero, honestly, not Nero Caesar, or it would be his or Caesar, or it would be his title, Nero's full title, or something like that. Why would it be Nero Caesar? The only person who I know of who called him Nero Caesar, and he even did that the minority of times, would have been Josephus. Everyone else called him Nero Caesar or one of his titles. They wouldn't call him Nero Caesar. Anyway, let's talk about that. But I don't find 616 the 616 variant to be like a compelling reason to say this has to be Nero. Everyone thought it was Nero in the first century, because if they did, Irenaeus wouldn't be fighting against it with only 100 years between them. Let's see, Stannis. I still can't pronounce your name, but here's the question. As to the first beast, I've wondered quite a bit on whether that could be the Vatican, which had and still sort of has significant global influence. I think that is probably the case about the Great Whore. Okay. Now, if somebody's watching this and they're Catholic, well, if you're a true believer, you're raptured. Okay. So it's the Great Whore that's left over after all the real believers from the Catholic Church are raptured. Okay. I do think that there are true, genuine believers in Jesus Christ in the Catholic Church who are just deceived. I think there was a time period when there were very few of those, or none. And during the Reformation, I think there was almost no true believers in the Catholic Church. I think today that a lot of the people in the Catholic Church don't understand their history, don't understand what the Council of Trent declared, and which is like to anathematize the true gospel of Jesus Christ, and actually do, in contradiction to their own church, believe the gospel. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people, Catholic, a lot of Catholic people in heaven one day. But if I do think in Revelation 17 we're going to find that the Great Whore is probably most plausibly the Catholic Church. And if that's the case, don't worry, it's just the Catholic Church that's left over after the rapture. Okay, so another benefit to having the rapture view, it gets you out of being hated by all the Catholics. But no, I don't think that the Catholic Church is, if you look at it historically, it doesn't preach the true gospel. You just read the Council of Trent. Just read the declarations of the Council of Trent. But today, for whatever reason, in order to sort of be more appealing and to be more apologetic, the Catholic Church, a lot of Catholic Church apologists are softening that and are like, no, we're saved by faith and all this stuff, and then we go out and we serve God because of our faith and all. And so there's a lot of negating of the Council of Trent that they're doing. Council of Trent says if you say we're saved by faith and then our faith just produces good works, you are anathema. We are saved by our good works, which is wrong. That's not the true gospel. But a lot of Catholics deny that, and it's a glorious inconsistency. I praise God for it. I just wish they would stop calling themselves Catholics because they deny their own faith. But at any rate, I do think the Catholic Church is probably in Revelation 17. We'll talk about that in a couple months when we get there. I don't think it's the first beast because the Great Whore is riding on the first beast. I think that first beast gets its power from the Great Whore, which would be the Catholic Church, and then ditches it because it doesn't want this Christian or even pretend Christian organization running it. It just wanted the power. And that's what we find in Revelation 17. So read Revelation 17. Let me know what you think. And join us back here in August, if the Lord allows us to, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so that's all the questions for today. Thanks for joining us, guys. This was much longer than I thought, 3-hour long stream. Thought it was going to be shorter, but hey, it's worth taking the time on Revelation chapter 13. This is a big one. This is huge. Populate your questions in even after the live stream. Go ahead and ask questions, and I will try to add them to our next stream just to answer them, because I know there's lots of questions about this, lots of different views on it. I don't know that I've addressed all the views or all the different arguments. I thank the moderator for sending me that argument about 616 because that is one that a lot of people talk about. It's a good argument to bring up and to respond to and to talk about. And if you think about another argument that would be helpful for us to respond to, let me know. So our next stream should be, let's see, on June 6th. That's probably not going to happen. So we're probably going to change the date for that stream. Maybe it'll be June 13th because June 6th is my anniversary. So we're probably not going to do that. We'll do that on another day. I will announce what day we'll do, but hopefully that'll still be in June. Hopefully we can still do that June. And we may not do the first week in July as well because it's July 4th. So we might be moving some of the streams around. I will let you know. Maybe we'll move to the end of every month. Maybe we'll do May 30th for our next stream, and then June 27th, and then July 25th. That actually might work. We'll see. We'll see how that works. But at any rate, we'll let you know how that all works. And thank you for hanging out. I just went to Ohio, preached at Norwalk Baptist Church for hours and hours, and preached through the book of Daniel. So I'll be releasing those sermons soon, and hopefully that'll be a blessing to you. I've got lots of other stuff in the works, so hopefully a lot of not live stream videos coming out fairly soon. And in the meantime, I appreciate your prayers for me, and we'll keep on plugging away at explaining the complex parts of the Bible. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are so grateful for your goodness and kindness that has guided us all the days of our life. Here we are, living in 2026. We know the rapture could happen at this very moment, or it could happen long after we die and go to heaven. We thank you for your wisdom on this. We thank you for the timing that you've chosen. And we pray that you'd help us to study your word in the meantime and to preach it to others and to be genuine Christians in our hearts and in our actions. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name.